welcome to the meeting of the City Council on Wednesday, March 27th. I'd like to call to order the meeting, and if you'd please rise and pledge allegiance with me.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. And Kathy, if you would go ahead and do the roll call.
I'll be happy to. Ms. Berry?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Mr. Kalin? Here. Mr. Pepe? Here. Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Mr. Tarter? Here. Mayor Baruch?
Here.
Thank you, Council.
If I can get a motion to adopt the meeting agenda, please.
Mayor, I move to adopt the meeting agenda.
If I can get a second.
Second.
That's Mr. Snyder on second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. The meeting agenda is adopted. And we have a proclamation this evening. I've asked Vice Mayor Snyder to read the proclamation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whereas since the colonial period, the Commonwealth of Virginia has closely held the institutions of local government, and whereas local governments throughout the Commonwealth provide valuable services to the citizens of the communities they serve, and whereas citizen services such as law enforcement, public health and safety, recreational opportunities, and educating local children are most often delivered at the local level. And whereas, in recognition of the work performed by local governments, the Virginia General Assembly on February 29, 2012 designated the first week in April as Local Government Education Week in Virginia. And whereas April 2nd, 1908 was the creation of the council manager form of government in the city of Stanton, thereby making the first week in April appropriate for this designation.
Thank you. Now, therefore, I, Nader Baruch, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby proclaim the week of April 1st through the 7th, 2013 as Local Government Education Week in the City of Falls Church, and further proclaim that Falls Church, city government, and the Falls Church city schools will partner to promote civic education and engagement in an effort to educate citizens about their local government, strengthen the sense of community, and engage the next generation of local government managers. In witness whereof I unto set my hand and cause the seal of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, to be fixed on this 27th day of March 2013. Ms. Mester.
Mayor and Council, if I could, we are appreciative of Council's taking this enough effort to do this proclamation. It's also something we're doing statewide with all our peer localities. And I just wanted to let the Council and the public know about some of the partnerships we're doing with the schools. Next week, I'm going to be reading a delightful book called Out and About at City Hall that talks all about the city manager and the services we do, to a first grade class, a second grade class at Mount Daniel, and then a Thursday, a fourth grade class at TJ. And then on Tuesday afternoon, I'm going to have the pleasure of talking to 120 seventh graders. They're pulling together their whole social studies group together so we can talk about what does the city do, what does the assistant city manager do, and we'll highlight some of the Safe Routes to School projects so they can see something happening right near their school. So thank you for the support of this proclamation.
Are there any members of the public that are here to be sworn in to boards and commissions? Shad, do you know if anybody's coming in? Okay. We are on to receipt of public comments. What I'm going to do is I'm happy to take any public comments. I have some speaker slips for items on the agenda. I'm happy to take those now or when we get to the agenda items. But let's go ahead and start with the items that are not on the agenda, and then if you wish to address council on items that are on the agenda, I'm happy to take those now or when we get to them. The first speaker slip that I have is from Mr. Jerry Barrett regarding the NVCC.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm Jerry Barrett, and I'm your representative, the city's representative, thanks to your effort on the Community College Board, and I have been for 7 years. I have one more year. I'm here to ask you to support the item in the city manager's budget that provides funds for the community college, as you have done since the community college was formed. There's really good reason to continue to support NOVA, and I'll give you a couple of examples related to how it impacts the high school. The first one is that 1 in 10 graduates of George Mason go to Nova on average over the past 10 years. And the second one is that Nova has a counselor at George Mason High School for 1 day a week each year, each month of the year, all year long during the academic year. And she's involved with a thing called the Pathway Program, which is getting students to get an associate degree and go on to get a baccalaureate. And any student that participates in this is guaranteed to be, if they have a decent average at the community college, they'll get into any four-year college or university in Virginia as a junior. And she's working with 24 students currently, helping with all the things that many students wouldn't understand about getting into a college, all the paperwork and all the other provisions that they have to take care of. And then the third thing is, and this just happened this past year, Nova and the high school have conducted a dual enrollment class in geophysics, of all things. And with 14 students in that. And as a result of a dual enrollment class, those students get credit for high school and college at the same time. And so one of the results of those several things I just said is that an upcoming junior can take a summer course and then take dual enrollment or AP classes or IP classes, and they can finish, they can enter college as a graduate with credits before their senior year. Just a few other things about the college, because I'm surprised how few people know much detail about it. And I laid some things near your seats there that'll give you some background. But I'm just going to talk about a couple of highlights. One is, Nova is the largest community college in the country, and it's the largest, has the largest enrollment in the state. It has 7,800 students enrolled. And you know, the big four-year schools have 30 to 40,000, so it's not just big, it's really big compared with those schools. 40% of the Northern Virginians who seek higher education at one time or another will attend Nova. And right now, the fastest growing part of the college is online programs. They have 400 classes that are being taught right now in 40 different degree programs. I'm on to the second page, it's just a half page. There's on that one thing that looks like a bookmark, it has a lot of details. You can give a lecture on the elevator with it. Nova will have a large impact on what happens to our economy in the next 10 years, because during that time it's estimated that 600,000 new and replacement jobs will be created in Northern Virginia, which, as you know, is the powerhouse of the state. And they'll be doing that through the degree programs, but also through a very large program they have called manpower development. And it empowers people to get back into the workforce, or those who are just entering the workforce, with the skills that are being needed in the economy as it moves forward in the next 10 years. This will be a big demand on additional classrooms, and as the city is experiencing, Richmond is pretty slow to fund things and continues to reduce funding on many things. And so Nova's facing the same problem, and they'll be needing additional classrooms. So Nova has, in the past couple of years, engaged in a number of strategies to try to fill that gap in funding. So we certainly need the funding from state and local governments. It's crucial. So thanks for listening, and I appreciate your continued support.
Mayor, if I might, just a quick comment. I want to thank Jerry for his work on behalf of Nova and the city. And Nova, I think, is a critical institution in Northern Virginia, so thank you very much for your work.
Thank you, Jerry. The next speaker slip that I have is Mr. Gordon Thies. Dr. Thies?
Evening, Gordon Thies, 802 Ridge Place, Falls Church. I don't know exactly what I want to say now. I appreciate the city manager approaching me before the meeting to tell me what he was going to say or some idea of what he's going to say in response to the whole Van Buren mess tonight, and his honesty with me that I'm not going to agree with him. I figured that. If you spend weeks on end studying the language of the law and the code and looking at definitions and applications and stuff, I'm sure that you can find a way to see things in a way that you want to see them, as opposed to that if you just read the language of the law, the 4 or 5 sentences when it comes to how streets are applied, for example, in the city charter and the authority that it gives the 7 individuals, in terms of when can that be abandoned by the city and when can it not. And I can appreciate that people around town have city paper streets next to them that they use for their own pleasure, but at this point, but that doesn't give them the property. The code of that particular language, chapter 30 or paragraph 34, specifically says who owns the street and how it's to go about being applied. But 4 weeks ago, I stood up here just completely shocked. I guess I shouldn't have been shocked. I was aghast that we had approved a building permit on Van Buren, and because everybody knew last fall, everybody knew the Planning Commission was up here saying, don't do this. The zoning administrator had put out an interpretation that, as my understanding, was the way the code had always been interpreted for front yard lots. And I know there are people watching who are like, what the heck is this guy talking about? But the bottom line is that the law says that you follow or you should follow the law. I can't even speak straight because I've got this thing written, and it really doesn't matter because, a bunch of people wrote to you and you wrote back and you said, well, we're waiting on the city attorney, and I'm waiting on the city attorney, but I know it's not going to end here because there's only 7 people here that can make this end, and you're it, because I can't. 7 years, I've been pointing these things out. People all over town have been pointing it out. People get upset, then the house is built and they crawl back into their cave. And then on another street, people get upset, and yet it's the same old thing. New leaders, same representation, nothing. We got nothing. So are you going to stop it this time? Maybe not for Van Buren, because that would be a little crazy. But what about the future? What's the next substandard lot issue? Front yard averaging issue. Front yard setbacks on a curve that you draw a straight line across and give away city right away. When are you going to make this stop? That's my question for you. And I'll sit patiently waiting. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I might, in response to some of the citizen questions, I had indicated that we'd ask the city attorney for a legal opinion. I wonder if he could summarize that for us.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Snyder. Yes, I had looked into this. As you know, I had written a letter of opinion to all of you on City Council, and I'd like to just briefly summarize that for your benefit as well as Dr. Thies. I understand, but you just spoke, and I want to respond to the concerns you raised. The definition of street in the zoning ordinance, section 48-2, does not include paper streets. And I therefore concluded that the zoning administrator acted within his discretion as provided by Virginia law and a long line of Supreme Court of Virginia cases in concluding that side yard setbacks apply to the lot at 408 Van Buren. The Supreme Court of Virginia in the 1981 case of Cash versus Stanton interpreted the term street in that zoning ordinance the same way that the zoning administrator did in this case. The zoning administrator issued his same determination regarding a property on another paper street in the city in 2011. It was important legally that the zoning administrator be consistent with his 2011 determination in that case, there being no rational basis for treating 408 Van Buren differently from the 2011 matter. I reviewed this. I've spoken to the planning director, the city manager, the zoning administrator, and other city staff. I have found no evidence of any backroom discussions or deals, as was alleged by some citizens of the city when they raised their concerns. Instead, city staff followed their standard process for reviewing the building permit application for 408 Van Buren. Now, I know that this is a serious issue based on the concerns that have been raised. One solution would be for an amendment to the zoning ordinance, section 48-2, so that the term street
is amended to include paper streets. And in my memo to you, I submitted some proposed language to address that problem. As Dr. Thies mentioned just a minute ago, there is another issue here that I think is related, and that is the issue of substandard lots. The amendment to the zoning ordinance to address the substandard lot issue is pending. It is my understanding from Mr. Snyder, the planning director, that is expected to come before City Council for approval and a vote later this spring. So that's the opinion that I've reached in summary. As you know, the memo I submitted to you is much more lengthy than the few bullet points that I've stressed this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Any questions on that for Mr. Foster or the city manager?
Mr. Mayor, I just wondered if we could set this amendment on paper streets down for consideration at a work session in the near future. So I know we've got some budget issues coming up, but this is an issue which hopefully we can address. So
I think that would be appropriate. So if there's consensus on council, we can go ahead and set that up for a work session. We'll have to figure out when we do that, whether we try to do it during the budget process or after when we take up the substandard lot issue. It may make sense to take it up when we take up substandard lots and take it up collectively after we get through the budget process, since we're at the thick of that. Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question. Does anyone know if there are any pending situations that are akin to this, that are working their way through the process that we don't want to hear about until we are able to address the substance of this ordinance that we're going to consider?
I do not. I refer to the city manager if he's aware of any. But in my discussions with the individuals I mentioned just a minute ago, including the director of planning, did not mention any other pending applications. But I can certainly, again, confirm that tomorrow.
Okay. I guess I would just ask if there are any such applications that the council be informed, or I would ask that the council be informed so that we might consider that in the fullness of the issue that we're going to be talking about, as Mr. Snyder and the mayor suggested. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, council? We are on to the next speaker slip, and that's Mr. Paul Parrott. Mr. Parrott?
Good evening. My name is Paul Parrott. I live at 319 North Van Buren Street, neighbor to the Van Buren property under construction, and I must say I'm very distressed with the way things have been handled in the city. It seems to me that the spirit of our comprehensive plan has really been violated and not respected by the city staff. That all this you should not be allowing the staff to operate the way that they do to make these kinds of interpretations. The master plan, comprehensive plan is clear as to what it says. I mean, we don't have to obfuscate the language. And that seems to be what's happening. And that's why there's so much rumor about backdoor deals that I've heard about, just like you all have heard yourselves. It's really distressing to be living in a community that operates like this. Mr. Tartar, I have a question for you. Back in the fall, we had talked about, or you'd said that there were going to be meetings and there would be a lot of community discussion about the issue of those substandard lots. And I really haven't, I've talked to you about it and you haven't gotten back to me to let me know what's going on with that.
Sure. I think we've just heard that this issue is going to be coming before the city council. The substandard lot's going to be coming before the city council. I'd hoped and thought, as others had, that it might have been coming earlier in the year. It is not. It's been put off, but as you just heard, it looks like it's going to be happening in the next month or two.
Well, yeah, I'm frankly very disappointed with you, because you said that you were going to organize community meetings to discuss it before that happened and before it came to the council, and that there would be a lot of community input, and that hasn't happened. And I see a lot of inaction. You know, all the letters that have gotten written to council members get returned to people get a response saying it's being addressed to the very staff that are mucking it up, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm just really disappointed.
Well, I mean, I guess I would say that there will be a public process. There has been some. The Planning Commission had a listening session in the fall, and there will be a full set of public hearings in this matter.
Yeah, but it was at that very session that it was said that there would be public discussions, and it hasn't happened. I think you all are dragging your feet, and it's really disappointing. That's
Yeah,
all I have to say.
let's focus on two issues. I understand that there's the issue that was raised about the Van Buren, which we did have the city attorney look at and provide us guidance on that. And that's really, in my view, and other council members can speak to this, that's why we do have a city attorney when issues like this come up that are legal in nature. That's why we do turn to our city attorney to provide us that guidance. And I do think that happened in this case. As far as the overall zoning issues, we are moving forward with the review. As Mr. Tarter mentioned, the Planning Commission is taking these up, and I think we do need to make sure that those are well publicized, so perhaps, again, on the planning website, we can put those up, consider doing further, whether it's town halls, because these types of issues are extremely important to make sure that the public does have an opportunity to discuss the substandard lots, and make sure that we have a clear path forward once the council does take it up.
I agree with that, and I thank you for that. It concerns me when I hear your language of perhaps and consider. You're not addressing it straightforward and in an efficient way. It's taking way too much time. And
Understood, and again, we'll be taking this issue up. You know, what I will say is we are talking about property rights that are, you know, there's always differing views on that. And that's why we're taking a very studied approach, but I do think that we need to move in earnest on this. We are beginning the budget process, but shortly thereafter, I do think that we do have on our work plan to take this substandard lot issues up. There's been some meetings about it. Some areas have been addressed, but I think we do need to have the work plan exactly of when we're going to have hearings about those issues coming forward. So, Mr. Shields, if you can work with staff, with planning staff to put that together so we can begin that community dialogue.
We'll do that, and the Planning Commission, with the work they've done on the substandard lot ordinance, I think is going to be communicating with the council on its findings and its recommendations, so we'll have that coming forward shortly. We will also docket the issue of a definition of a street with respect to the zoning code, and I do want to just note that Mr. Duncan asked the question whether there are any, building permits pending where this issue might come to the fore, and we will check that and communicate that out to the City Council. But aside from building permits, I will say, just so everybody's clear, that if there were to be a change of the definition of street in the zoning code, that has huge implications. We have paper streets throughout the city, where people abut alleyways or other platted streets. And if those are considered streets for setback purposes, those houses will have effectively 2 front yards. And so those houses that have sheds in the backyards or privacy fences abutting those alleyways, those would all be impacted by that definitional change. And so these are hard issues. And so I just want to note that as we go forward. There won't be, I don't think, a real easy and quick fix to this. If there were a proposed language fix on that definition, I think that we'd need to have a real public process about that and fully understand all those repercussions.
yeah, I just want to conclude with one thought also, that to remind you that we never got a fair hearing in our appeal on the Van Buren property. And we shouldn't have to be in that spot where we have to shell out money to make appeals because the ordinances are not being interpreted, or they're being interpreted in ways that don't really respect the letter the way they're written. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Those are all the speaker slips that I have on items that are not on the agenda. I'm happy to take any comments now or when the items come up. Ms. Gross.
Thank you, Mayor Baruch, members of the council. My name is Ellen McCauley Gross, 303 Lincoln Avenue. I'm speaking tonight as an individual citizen rather than as a board member of the Village Preservation and Improvement Society, and I speak to enthusiastically endorse the Harris Teeter project. Like others who reviewed the plans, I had concerns for the project's effect on close-by neighbors, for the number of apartments' impact on the schools, and for the general size of the construction. However, after attending the developer's presentation to the Council and Planning Commission, I became convinced that the developers had in fact done a great deal to alleviate these concerns, and that the ones remaining could not be changed and keep the project viable. Yes, this is a big project, but it will be located exactly where big projects should be located in Falls Church, on Broad Street near the crossroads. And for those who say a grocery store shouldn't be placed in the heart of downtown, I would only mention my many happy days in Austin, Texas. For those of you who have never been to Austin, Austin has an enormous number of wonderful restaurants and other entertainment venues. But on Sunday mornings, the outdoor area of the Whole Foods flagship store is packed with folks having coffee, reading their papers, and enjoying time with friends in the heart of downtown. My only recommendation at this point would be to urge the developers to create as much of this community building outdoor space as possible with this project. My husband Mark and I hope and trust that all of you will work with speed, determination, and sincere commitment to make this project the success it can be, to become a terrific addition to our little city. Thank you very much.
Ms. Gross. Are there any other members of the public that wish to address items that are on the agenda at this point? Mr. Anderson?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm Carl Anderson. I live at 290 Gundry Drive. I'm a member of the Winter Hill Homeowner Association community. I used to be a board member. I'm speaking as a private citizen, but for 12 years I maintained the parking lots in the Winter Hill, the townhouse development. And those parking lots were the same footprint that was approved for the Tyler Garden Apartments in 1946, right after the war, when people had maybe one automobile if they were lucky. And somehow we've managed to get by for the last 35 years with the new development. The city approved townhomes and condominiums, but no additional parking. But because we have fairly considerate, we have a good neighborhood. We have people that are mostly considerate with each other, and we've been able to get by with the parking issues. And of course, this leads me to comment on the the Rushmark Harris Teeter complex. And I just think that adding 280 apartments on top of the Harris Teeter is sacrificing the future for short-term gain. You're going to get an initial rent and you're going to like it, but the thing is it's going to bring families that are going to have children, and you're not going to be able to keep children out of there, and it's going to add to the school. And why are you building these additional projects? Is because you want revenues for schools. And so you're going to be chasing your tail. You're approving more and more of these projects, and you're actually bringing more children into the community. I love children, but the trouble is you're not going to be able to keep up with the load you're creating for yourself in the future. That's why I say you're sacrificing the future for short-term gain. Revenue for the schools, I understand, is the biggest part of the city's budget, and you're just defeating yourselves with this. So you're never going to make up the shortfall down the road if you keep adding all these residential units. The 280 apartments is for Rushmark's benefit, not the city's. That's what I think. If you look at, I'm fine with having a Harris Teeter. When I first moved into the neighborhood, there was a Grand Union, and where Famous Days is now. It was very nice to have a supermarket, a small supermarket in the community. And I missed them when they moved, but so I'm in favor of having a reasonably sized Harris Teeter. I understand the one over in Arlington is about 40,000 square feet. That thing is a mess to go to. I used to go to it when I lived over in Arlington with my ex-wife, and but they have a lot of ways of getting in and out of that facility. There's a very large parking lot with other stores. I'm sure most of you have seen it, and so you can funnel people in and out of there fairly easily. That's not going to be the case with this one. You've only got a couple of ways in and out of this, so I just think it's too big a store for the location. I think you need to consider downsizing it. The other thing, you can't even control the traffic on Annandale Road as it is. You put in, because I was involved in getting a three-way stop at Gundry and Annandale Road. People, the scofflaws run that all the time. I've seen you put police officers out there to catch them when they run it. They run it all the time. So if you're going to put that complex in, and well, you're going to do it. I think you're going to do it. I just wish you'd do it intelligently. You're probably going to have to put a traffic light for people getting in and out of that, because otherwise you're going to have people run over or run into. We've already got gridlock in Falls Church at during rush hour in the morning and in the evenings along Broad Street. And I don't know how you're going to deal with it, because unless you can increase the arteries around the area, and I don't know how you can do that unless you do something like they did in Clarendon with making Wilson Boulevard one way and Clarendon Boulevard the other. I'm not sure how you would work that in Falls Church. Excuse me?
If I can ask you to start wrapping up, the buzzer went off.
Okay. All right, well, I just want to ask you to do three things, those of you that are going to approve the project. Before you approve the project, please go around in rush hour, drive through the Winter Hill area, see what it's like in the morning, and see what it's like in the evening. There's quite a gridlock, not gridlock, but very tight on South Virginia Avenue near Broad Street. You'll see it's not easy getting through there. If you go through there in the evening during the rush hour, you'll see there's a lot of young people with young children out along Gundry Drive and James Street. And I think anything you do to add 280 apartments is going to really make problems in that area. And the third thing is, please go through late at night between 9:30 and 10, and you'll see that the density is like urban parking. There's just no place on the street that's not taken. People that come home late at night say they sometimes have to park a couple blocks away and hike into home. So anyway, I'm asking you to do those three things before you approve. Please go through the area and look at it at those hours of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
And see what it says.
Thank you.
What you think.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for one minute.
All right. Any other members of the public that wish to address council at this point? And I'm happy to open this up again when we get to public comments. Not seeing any. Ms. Bischoff, if you'd go ahead and summarize the written comments we've received.
Council, you've had many emails since the last meeting, and I'll try to go through these quickly. With regard to zoning paper streets and 408 Van Buren Street, I have a list here. The following individuals have written council about the paper street abutting 408 Van Buren Street and issues regarding process, zoning decisions, and violation of the city charter or code. Many of the letters echoed the same concerns, so I'm highlighting only some of the letters here, but listing all of those who provided comments. And you have, as backup, you have all the letters, emails we received. Gordon Thies at 802 Ridge Place commented on the vacation of a paper street off Van Buren and his belief that the process was not properly followed. Margaret Whitehead, 809 Ridge Place, believes that 2 homes built on Van Buren Street are in violation of the zoning code and decisions by the zoning administrator are arbitrary. Ms. Tutty Fairbanks at 313 North Van Buren Street believes the zoning administrator has disregarded the city's zoning laws with regard to 2 homes built on Van Buren Street. Sally Eckfeld at 228 Forest Drive said that regarding Van Buren Street, citizens who expressed rightful outrage at what appears to be repeated, arbitrary, and capricious disregard for city laws are being effectively marginalized as hysterics. Margaret Kaplow, 208 North Van Buren, echoed some of those concerns. Marty Meserve, Martha Meserve, Marty Meserve, who was on council previously, asked if it was true that the paper street at the end of Van Buren had been vacated without appropriate public process required by law. Pat Myers at 115 Buxton Road echoed comments. Kathleen Nebaker at 310 North Van Buren Street discussed the vacation of the paper street next to 408 Van Buren and the issues associated with that. Kathleen Nixon, 312 Van Buren Street, echoed comments. Stephanie Oppenheimer, 610 North Oak Street, echoed comments. George Pavalis at 114 North Fairfax Street discussed the issues associated with the split lot development at 408 Van Buren and the effect such density has on stormwater runoff in the environment. Dennis Szymanski echoed other comments. With regard to the budget, Mary Beth Connolly submitted several questions following the town hall meeting on March 16th, and she further discussed the use of fund balance for unfunded needs. Mark Kay at 106 Tollgate Way asked if the city could tax the owners of apartment buildings in a manner more comparable to homeowners in order to generate additional tax revenue. Robert Pender at 313 Little Falls Street expressed concerns about the increasing tax rate in the city and the cycle of homeowners leaving the city after their children have gone through the school system, and the elderly who have moved to other locations that are more affordable. With regard to the Stormwater Enterprise Fund, Alan Frank, representing the Eden Center, Inc., expressed concern about the impacts a stormwater fee would have on the small business owners at the Eden Center. Reverend Davies Kirkland of the Doolin Church expressed concerns about the impact a stormwater fee would have on the local churches, and believed that the city had been less than forthcoming with the faith-based communities in Falls Church. Linda Nabergall at 1005 Hillwood Avenue raised some concerns with regard to the proposed stormwater fund, specifically with the powers of the director and staffing. In her follow-up letter, Ms. Nabergall was encouraged by the council's progress towards implementation of a stormwater management plan, and she expressed her hope that a plan will be moved quickly by council towards completion. Jonathan Thompson at 215 North Van Buren commented on the expense he incurred when he was required to install a stormwater retention and disposal system in order to have a building permit issued on new construction at his home site. He expressed concerns about the increasing tax burden on residents with a stormwater fee. With regard to the Harris Teeter project, or the Rushmark HIT project, Ken Fears at 173 West Annandale Road asked that council use its influence to make the developer finalize changes that were requested by the neighbors in Winter Hill. He noted that the new grocery store would change the character of this part of the little city. Ellen Gross at 303 Lincoln Avenue, she read her letter to you at the speaker. FCC TV, you received a letter from Andrew Curtin, who urged the council to fully fund the FCC TV. Wanda Howard on Virginia Avenue urged council to fund FCC TV, and she believed it was short-sighted for the schools to pull out of the tripartite agreement regarding the station. And with regard to miscellaneous issues, Richard Libovitz asked the city to request Arlington County to provide an exception after the deadline for registration, which would allow the City of Falls Church children to play in their soccer league. Mark Escobar with SAIC sent a notification letter to the mayor advising of layoffs at its Arlington Boulevard location. And I apologize for typos. I was really doing this at the last minute before I came downstairs. And that's it, council. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All the letters are also posted on Granicus, the ones that are in your packet, so they're available for everyone to see in full.
Thank you, Kathy. Council, we are on to any council member requests at this point. Not seeing any. We are on to the report of the city manager to council.
Council, in light of tonight's full agenda, I will abstain from any reports tonight, and we can move forward with the agenda.
Thank you. Mr. Shaw, if you'd read the first item, please.
Council, the first item before you is for a public hearing only. No council action is required this evening on TR 13-10. Resolution to grant a special exception for residential uses within mixed-use development projects and height bonus for mixed-use development on the approximately 2.6 acres of land located at 255 and 301 West Broad Street. Real property code numbers 52-309-414 and 52309-111 and 52309-412, known as 301 West Broad Street by Rushmark Properties, LLC.
Thank you. And before we get started, as I've previously disclosed, I own property at 243 Gundry Drive, and my wife, Bernadette Baruch, is president of the Winter Hill Community Association. And as a prudential matter, even though I'm not required to, I believe that I can, and I'm disclosing the following facts, and I believe I can participate in the transactions fairly objectively and in the public interest. So, and I believe the order tonight, Wyatt, if you have some opening comments, and I believe we're going to have the developer present for about 5 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and open it up for public comments and public hearing only.
That is correct. Mayor Baruch, members of council, this resolution and this special exception application for a project at 301 West Broad Street has been referred out to the public and to boards and commissions for their comments and recommendations before it comes back to the city council at your May 13th meeting for consideration and action. Tonight we have, to assist with the public hearing aspect of tonight, we have a presentation, and we're joined by Stefan Grassner of Reshmark Properties LLC to provide just a brief introduction of the project for the benefit of the community. And we also are joined by Murray Walker, the architect, with Davis Carter Scott Limited.
Mayor, City Council, and Falls Church staff, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present tonight. Myself and Patrick Kearney, who could not be here, are excited about the prospects of this project. We have assembled to make the potential of this project into a reality, we have assembled a strong development team. I wanted to kind of spin through, just highlight the timeline of current events to where we got today. Since our first submission in October, our community engagement has been active, ongoing, and consistent. We have thoughtfully considered and responded to the questions and comments presented to us today. Calculated by the Falls Church's own business development department, the fiscal impact of the mixed-use project is approximately $1.32 million per year, a $22 million net present value over a 20-year period, equivalent to a 4.5-cent assessed value reduction in the real property tax rate for Falls Church. The project is in alignment with the comprehensive plan and vision for the city center. It is mixed use, pedestrian-friendly, transit-oriented, and sustainable. Much of the concepts and vision for the city center are realized by this project. The city center is envisioned as a hub of community activity where people stroll, shop, dine, attend cultural and entertainment events. The project consists of a 60,000 square foot Harris Teeter super flag store that will offer a wide selection of prepared foods on the ground floor, with a plaza area offering outdoor cafe, seating area of approximately 1,700 square feet. And there will also be 3,470 square feet of additional retail space on the ground floor. There's 265 market rate and 17 affordable dwelling units, and also amenities consistent with a Class A property, and also underground parking for the retail and residential customers and tenants. Since our first submission in October, we've made significant revisions and improvements to the plan that's currently submitted, added more buffer area, moved the massing and height to West Broad Street. The project proposes a building height of 90 feet or above, or 15 feet above the 75-foot maximum height allowed in the B2 Central District. We've taken a look, and actually the Byron, which Doug Carter here and his group have designed, it actually measures about 92.6, and that kind of answers a question that was asked before, so it's consistent in height. We've enclosed the back of the house elements, including the loading dock, reduced the density, underground utility services, undergrounded all the utility service. And that includes the pole that's actually in the HOA location of the Winter Hill. That would also be undergrounded as well. We've revised the traffic impact analysis and parking assessment, and provided an extensive transportation demand management plan, which is in accordance to city transportation goals. Here, this slide just kind of demonstrates the improvements to the setbacks. The current project shifts the massing and height from to West Broad Street, and thus pulling the building mass away from the neighboring townhouses. The building setback on Broad Street has been provided at 20 feet. And the measurement taken from the curb of Annandale Road to the face of the building is 14 feet. And have Doug Harder here to speak about the design elements.
Mr. Mayor and City Council, I will try very quickly, since we are probably over our 5 minutes, to just walk you through the project. And so, first of all, here is a site plan that shows the frontage on Broad Street. You heard about the setbacks from the neighborhood. The white dots represent the pedestrian connections in and around the site, and you will note this one, which goes straight through the site from Annandale up to Broad Street, so you have an uninterrupted flow for pedestrians, should they wish to do that, as well as approaching the store itself from Annandale. Next. And so, running quickly through the floor plans, this is the ground floor. Here is Broad Street. This is the 60,000 square feet of Harris Teeter's. We have a further 3,500 square feet to the west, and we have the main entrance into the residential units above. We have a one-store base. We have 6 floors of residential over the top, and as you just saw, the parking for everyone is below grade. Access to the parking for Harris Teeter's, if we drop down one level, Stefan, please. So here we are again, Broad Street. The entrance from Broad Street is at this point, and you can come into this entire parking level, and all of that parking level is dedicated to Harris Teeter and the residential, the retail areas up on Broad Street. We have elevators, one in particular here, which is accessible from this whole level and is destined to bring people from the parking lot up into the Broad Street shopping area. The other elevators are for the residents coming through from the 2 floors below. The second entrance that we've got is from Annandale, and so we will be able to drive in from Annandale to access the whole Harris Teeter parking area. And so for convenience, we do have 2 ways in, 2 ways out. The Stefan, next. The next floor below is actually the parking for the residential, and that is accessed off Annandale, and we have 2 floors of parking to support the retail, the residential units. I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. This is just showing the format of the residential units up above, and shows you this. The color breakdown is just to separate the units. We were very, very conscious of the issues raised tonight about the school's attendance, and so these are relatively small sized units and will not generate an overburdening of the school system. Next. And so here is a section showing on the left Broad Street, and the entrance into Harris Teeter is right on the sidewalk of Broad Street. So this is the 2-level Harris Teeter. You see below that the parking, and that parking is accessed as if on grade from Broad Street, because Broad Street falls to the east. Beneath that, we've got the 2 levels of residential parking, and everything can be accessed from Annandale at this point. And so you can see the 20 feet of drop from Broad Street to Annandale in this section that shows you really how the site and the parking works. Next. And so here, the elevations, first of all, the north elevation on Broad Street, and so you see the 1-story base, continuous exposure for the retail so that we can enliven the street. We'll show you perspective in a moment, but this is a very, very articulated facade and will create a very appropriate scale to Falls Church and to the Broad Street environment. This is the elevation from the west, and so obviously this is the piece of the residential building that you will see as you're coming down Broad Street from the west. Next. And then the south and east elevations. This is the elevation which will be facing South Maple Street, and essentially the Harris Teeter's is in this area right the way across. and the parking area, as you see it, comes out of the grade as it approaches Annandale, and then the south elevation here facing Annandale itself. So we have a tower coming out towards Annandale. This is the entrance for both the loading access and for the Harris Teeter parking. This is the entrance for the residential parking. What I didn't mention is that this is the access point for the trucks coming to the loading for Harris Teeters, and so they will turn the corner here and come parallel to Broad Street to the west, and at this point they literally disappear inside a fully enclosed loading dock. It's actually more than that. There's part of the road enclosed within that area, so that we can prevent as much possible noise or visual disturbance to the immediate neighbors. That actually, we will show you in a moment, has been dramatically enhanced with a great deal of landscaping to also shield their views of the truck loading. We had to leave the trees off here so you can see the elevations next. And so here just a series of perspective shots, and then we've got a 90-second video if it should please the Mayor and Council. These are just perspectives of Broad Street. We just flashed past one that was showing the outdoor eating area from Harris Teeter's. Here we go. This is our Harris Teeter outdoor eating area. We do have a full 20 feet of sidewalk, which is above your average, and so we do have room also for seating on the sidewalk itself, as well as the Standard Falls Church planters here. So a really pedestrian-friendly environment with a lot of retail exposure all the way along the length of the building. Next. And so here is an aerial that shows you that sidewalk we were just referring to. We do have space for this kind of outdoor seating, and the Harris Teeter Outdoor Plaza is down here to the east. Next. And so coming around the back to Annandale, this is the entrance into the residential. That is the way that Harris Teeter's and the loading dock will access off Annandale, and you see all of the setbacks that we have created to respect the concerns of the neighbors. Next. And so we have planned a dramatic amount of landscaping. This is taken directly outside one of the houses of the neighborhood. We will use a combination, as you see here, of evergreen and deciduous. We deliberately use deciduous here because otherwise we'd have been showing you trees and no houses, and there wouldn't have been much point. But we will be very, very focused on that issue as we move forward with the plans. Next step. And so this is giving you an idea. This is on the 6th floor of the residential building, looking down onto the neighborhood. And so you see absolutely here the commitment to provide shielding from both sides, both for the residences that exist there now and for the people who will be living in the apartment, so we can avoid any visual disturbance one from the other. Next. And just another shot of the same thing so that we can show you how that will work, and then we have a 90-second video if Mr. Mayor, if it's okay. So this just drives you right the way around the site and helps you visualize. There are still perspectives, still don't show you the strength of the massing as you move along Broad Street, and that was a very important element, I think, not just for us, but you created your own master plan, which we have tried to follow in great detail through this whole thing. So I think you can see literally the ins and outs, the articulation, the massing on Broad Street. And now we're just going to drive to the east, and here's our 20-foot wide sidewalk. You can see the Harris Teeter's outdoor seating as we come around the corner. Right at this point, we've got a set of steps that goes up to it. So a great place for that Sunday morning brunch that was referred to. Now we'll go a little higher. So from the east then, the east elevation looking towards South Maple, you can see the impact of the building. And now we're coming around the corner onto Annandale, past this tower projecting out with its setback. There's the entrance into the Harris Teeter parking and the loading. Here's the neighborhood, obviously. And so I think as we go up Airborne again, you can see the amount of landscaping that we're planning here so that we can really respect those neighbors and hopefully build a building here that will do everything that the city was hoping for and can be a real complement to the neighborhood. Mr. Mayor and City Council, thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just go ahead and get the gallery lights up. I've got a couple of speaker slips, and I'm happy to take additional comments as well. The first speaker slip that I have is from Mr. Chuck Anderson. Mr. Anderson?
Hello, everyone. Chuck Anderson of 137 West Annandale Road. My home sits immediately adjacent to the proposed Harris Teeter project. Since the fall, I've been following the project closely and communicating with about 50 Winter Hill residents through an email list. A smaller group of us who live immediately adjacent to the site have held frequent meetings with most everyone on the council, with Rushmark and the architect, with city staff. We've done this to voice our hopes and concerns regarding the site concept. Most of us from the beginning of this process have accepted the inevitability of redeveloping the particular site. And we have seen many positives in Rushmark's plans. We've also been most appreciative of the time that Rushmark and individual members of the Council and Planning Commission have devoted to hearing our concerns. The current site concept does, in fact, address some of our biggest concerns regarding the buffer between what will be a very large building and our homes. And we appreciate the added expense that Rushmark has been willing to absorb in order to enclose the loading dock. A third key issue for us regarding the site's drive aisle, Doug's presentation went by so quickly, but I think I saw in it, again, some significant change, which, if I do understand it, will be very good news indeed to several homeowners. So I would like to spend a little time understanding that more fully. Those of us who live closest to the site have also gotten creative in suggesting some proffer ideas to further mitigate the impact of the project and further enhance its benefits to the neighborhood. And finally, we've expressed our support of the request made by city officials that Rushmark consider making improvements to Big Chimneys Park. And we will also be keenly interested in any suggestions put forward by the city to address traffic and parking concerns in the broader Winter Hill community. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson. The next speaker slip that I have is from Mr. Barry Bouchow.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, Barry Bouchow, 903 Madison Lane, speaking as an individual tonight. I'm in favor of the Harris Teeter project, and I understand the concerns of the neighbors. However, other communities around us have mitigated a lot of the problems associated with major developments in their area. I think Rushmark has done a wonderful job of mitigating many of the situations that are unfavorable to the neighbors. But what I really want to talk about is the process. 6 months now after we've gone through all this hashing and dashing, we're still talking about design issues. When a project comes through the door, you and the Planning Commission should give the Architecture Review Board some guidance. Refer it directly to them. Let them talk to the developers, the architects for the developers directly. Let them hash out in several 2 or 3 weeks. You'll know whether you have a project or not that the community can buy into. Now, after 6 months, we're still talking about design issues. All those issues could be resolved up front by referring them to the ARB very quickly. Now, I haven't read the charter for the ARB lately, but if there's powers that they're missing, then empower them to negotiate with the developer's architect. Architect to architect, our side against their side. You get a better product earlier on. It costs everybody a lot less money and a lot less time. You know, if I had had the opportunity 6 months ago, I would have asked for another modest parking structure near the project, because the George Mason Square parking structure, that's going to be overburdened, and soon we're going to have 20 million no parking signs there, and then people parking and complaining and so forth and so on. We should have had more parking. I'm sorry that everybody owns 3 cars in this day and age, but that's a fact. We need more parking in that downtown area, or it's not going to develop overall. I wish we could have more public art, street art along this project. It would enhance the value of walking the area so much. Since the tricentennial, it has always been envisioned by a lot of us that there'd be a town clock in that area. That area was picked to have a town clock. Never happened, but that's another story. Going through a lot in my mind here real quickly, and so I apologize if I'm rushing, but I please ask you to look at your process, how we got to this point. Get your architects involved with each other, get the design issues out early. We have design guidelines. I know they're not mandatory, but I think they should be, but that's another story also. So in the last couple of minutes that I have, I would like to discuss the schools overpopulation issue with you. Please, if you follow local politics and Mr. Stephen Fuller, you know that every community in this area is overcrowded in their schools. Why can't we form a coalition, a Northern Virginia education coalition, hire the best lobbyists there are, go down to Richmond and get some changes made? Gas tax, why can't we keep the gas tax up here for education? We got a inspection tax for Metro, let's have a gas tax for education. You're not going to solve the problem by overtaxing this community, trying to fix the problem. It's going to be a regional solution, and we need some regional power to get to Richmond and get some help, and hopefully Mr. Jarrett's community college will participate in that. Thank you.
Mr. Rochelle. Those are all the speaker slips that I have. Are there any other members of the public that want to address this item? Please, if you'd come forward and just state your name and your address.
Thank you very much. I'm Dee Ellison. I live at 298 Gundry, and I too have been following this, although not as closely as Chuck, who's done a phenomenal job keeping track of everything. So I really appreciate him and the opportunity to talk about this a minute. I have to say, I used to really, really like Harris Teeter. Now not so much. I'm concerned that the way they're approaching this puts them in the position of getting a profit while hurting our neighborhood. I'm an original owner in Winter Hill, and so I've seen quite a few changes in the neighborhood. One of the things that I care a lot about is the traffic on the street where I live, and it's not even right near the grocery store would be. But we have people speeding through that area all the time, a lot of them speeding now. And I know there'll be increased traffic. And I fear for the safety of our children and myself and all the adults around. I think the speeding issue is a really serious problem. It seems to me that the last thing in the world we need is more congestion and traffic on Broad Street. I just don't get this. And Little Annandale Road is overloaded now, so putting in delivery trucks and other things just is mind-boggling to me. I just feel like 60,000 square feet is way too much for that space. And I know that other grocery stores like Whole Foods have been doing two-level stores. And while it's not exactly what Harris Teeter had in mind at the beginning, I think those stores are wonderful, and they're packed with people. I'm concerned about all the additional numbers of people above the store. And I just wonder for the people who are talking about this and knowing how close our neighbors are to this. I don't even live right near there, and I'm just horrified that they would have to look up. And as far as the trees go, I think it would take like 25 years for the trees to get as tall as they are in that picture. I would just wonder if the people who are building this and the people who are speaking for the project, how they would feel about having this building right next to their homes. I think it's appalling that our neighborhood is being asked to give up so much. And I know it's really important for the city to have additional funding and additional monies. But I think what it's going to be doing to our neighborhood and our neighbors and friends is really frightening. Thank you. Also, when people talk, if they could talk a little louder, that would be helpful, because some of us have hearing problems.
We will. Thank you, Mr. Allison. Are there any other members of the public that wish to address council on this item?
Good evening. I'm David Tax. I own Clarendon's Beach Shack and Mike's Deli, and I'm speaking as a business owner in the area in favor of the Rushmark Harris Teeter properties. I think that it'll help bring people, keep people in the area that are going out of the area. I don't think everybody in Falls Church shops at Giant Food. I know I don't shop at Giant Food a lot. And I think that if the people are staying in the area, then they're also going to shop in the area and eat in the area, hopefully at my restaurant. So I think that Harris Teeter will be good for the area. I think that the traffic will probably increase, but there'll also be a lot of pedestrian traffic to that, and people who are driving to Giant or driving to Harris Teeter and Lee Highway will be able to walk. It's within walking distance of a large part of Falls Church City. And that's everything. Thank you.
Mr. Tax, are there other members of the public that wish to address this item? I'm going to go ahead and close this item for the public comment period. And again, there will be ample opportunities. I believe the boards and commissions are taking these items up. One request that I had gotten from some of the community members is if we can make those boards and commission meetings more readily available, perhaps on the website, and what the schedule is for the boards and commissions and when their meetings are. If we can add that to the web page that addresses the Rushmark property or the Rushmark proposal, I think that would be helpful to the public so they know when those meetings are up and coming. Just want to give council members an opportunity to provide any questions, comments, et cetera, that they have at this point. Ms. Berry.
I suppose this question is for Mr. Shields. I had two questions specific to the project. In all the discussions we've been having about the character and nature of the city of Falls Church and where we want to go as a community, our language and the intent that I have understood in discussions about mixed use has been to provide a full range of options to attract young people, to attract workforce housing, to keep seniors in place, et cetera. I mean, this is the language we've been using. We've certainly been discussing over the last several months. So I'm interested in the original model of the mixed use here in the Harris Teeter suggested a push towards this more inclusive young people, seniors, workforce housing. And now I see that the mix has shifted significantly to fewer efficiency units and fewer one-bedrooms. And so I'm wondering, within Harris Teeter's thinking, within this project's thinking, was there a shift in rationale? Was there a shift in their concept of what the market would bear? Is there something about the metrics? That's a large question. Something about the metrics that changed to create what we're now seeing as the mix of units? That's just question number one. And sorry, and question number two is, and this could also be for, perhaps you can answer this, or the Harris Teeter folks, the LEED certification, I'm a little confused about the language here because, oops, I've just lost it here. Oh yeah. There's the posting of a $50,000 bond, in the assumption that, if the LEED certification is not, if all the pieces are not together, that the $50,000 bond would be collected. But I guess I'm trying to understand if there is language that suggests there's something, it's odd in the language. If the building achieves the intended LEED certification X, but I'm trying to figure out, because it talks about the points necessary to achieve status of LEED silver. Is that wordsmithing, or is there a difference between points necessary to achieve versus achieving? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so of the two questions, let me speak to the LEED one first. The language that is in the proffer package right now is taken directly from the Gateway project. So we worked through the language to try to address the fact that when a project is delivered and we issue certificates of occupancy, we can't issue a C of O until they've complied with all the voluntary concessions on the proffers. But you don't get your LEED certification usually until a year after the building's occupied. So we've tried to get at that issue.
Okay.
And so that's the way we did it for the Gateway project. If you have commentary on it, we can continue to work on that to try to make a more perfect document on that to really get what we're trying to do. But it's just in recognition of that fact.
Okay.
With respect to the housing type, I will just note that demographically in the city, if you look at our census data, and we had a very interesting presentation from the NVRC about the city's demographics, and we are a community that has a little bit of a donut hole in terms of our age group of the young professionals in that age from basically 18 to about 35. That's a group that's pretty underrepresented in the city limits. And so it was of interest to us when Rushmark came forward with a housing product that they thought would meet that niche and help us have that more of a diversity in terms of our age brackets in the city. There have been changes to the housing mix with the changes that were made in terms of moving the building away from the neighborhood. They went taller, and the shape of the building changed. We have let the developer drive the unit size and that mix on a market basis, but I would invite the developer, if they want to speak to that in terms of bedroom counts and unit size, in terms of what their thinking is on that. I think they could probably answer that question best.
The majority of our units are going to be one studios and one bedrooms. And that is, to your point, to attract a younger demographic. And I think a lot of the tenants potentially are going to be young professionals, potentially roommate situations. And I don't see family. We're trying to develop a sense of community where people are going to be able to shop and dine and also live in the residential units above.
Vice Mayor Snyder.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I want to run over a couple questions very quickly and then ask for follow-up. First, I want to thank everyone here, those who spoke for and those who had critical comments about the project. Your participation has been invaluable, and please stay involved as we go through the process. My first question relates to the net fiscal impact. The number was put up on the screen at $1.32 million. And my question to city staff is that our number one? And number two, does the school cost element there reflect the latest school generation? The League of Women Voters have held a very interesting seminar that a lot of citizens attended and reacted to afterwards. And the point made there was that every housing type is generating more school costs than previously. So I'm not going to talk about the type of unit, but I do want to know whether the model is up to date with regard to its school generation costs. And then does it fully take into account the school operating and CIP costs in the net number? So that's a question, and again, I'll run through these very quickly because we have a lot of things on the agenda. Second item I'd like to address, also at the League of Women Voters event, there was a strong interest for more senior housing. I would ask the developer whether they would consider designating some portion of the housing units potentially for senior housing, and I'll be asking this of other developers as well as we go forward. Third issue that's been presented, I think, tonight very clearly is traffic management, both with regard to moving as much traffic as possible away from the neighborhood. And again, like Chuck Anderson, I hope that we've seen progress, significant progress in that area. And also traffic management on Annandale Road. And I think the city is going to have to play an active role here in managing the traffic around that site and getting it right the first time as to the best ways to get traffic in and out of the store so as not to increase the risk to those who live in the area. Finally, the Anthony's Restaurant is there, and we continue to get interest from our citizens about Anthony's Restaurant. So those are the high points that I just wanted to present tonight for work through the process as we go forward with this project. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Other council members? Mr. Tarter?
Sure. A couple questions. One, in looking through the staff report, it looks like the narrative's based on a January 23rd submission. Is that correct? So I guess what I'm curious to know, have there been any changes made since the January 23rd submission from either the staff or the developer?
I think the question, if I can, one is, anything changed in the staff report is question one, and then two is, have any of the plans changed from the developer's perspective since the council last saw this in work session?
A little bit, but basically, my question to maybe focus David more clearly is, we've had some meetings, I think we had meetings in January, February, all that stuff. But we have staff report sitting in a presentation today, and the staff report references the January 23rd set of plans. I guess my question to staff or the developer, is there any more recent plans? Are there any changes that have been made? I heard the presentation seems very similar with the previous. Are there any new changes that have been made since the January 23rd?
We've heard comments, and we've met with neighbors and are reviewing a couple changes, potential changes to the plan, but we have not formally submitted them yet. Okay.
When do you anticipate that you'll submit those?
I can't give you a definitive timeline, but I think within the next planning commission, I think is April 15th is the next date, so.
Prior to April 15th?
I would assume so, yeah.
Okay. Is there anything you can tell us that you've decided as far as changes that you've made that you're able to share with us tonight?
Well, we have submitted a traffic management or traffic study that contemplates a left turn off of Broad directly into the Harris Teeter. That is one thing. And then we have met with the neighborhood and are considering their suggestion to put the drive aisles together on Annandale Road. I formally submitted that new layout to Harris Teeter for their review, currently in review. So those are the things that we are currently looking at.
Clarification for staff. So it looks like the unit count has gone down. I can't remember the exact number, but the GFA, the gross floor area, has also gone down, but just by not as much. In other words, the unit count may have gone down 5%, but the GFA has also gone down, just not that much. Is that correct? Okay. And I guess my question, a little bit similar to Mr. Snyder's, is the fiscal impact that was run based on the revised unit count or based on the original unit count, unit type and count?
We've run it on the revised, on the updated January 23rd application. So the fiscal impact that we've run reflects this application and the unit count that's in it.
And that's what we heard tonight, is that same number? Okay.
Now what we will do is, we're going to provide a range for fiscal impact as we as we continue our analysis. I do want to note, one of the questions tonight was, does the fiscal impact model cover all of the service costs? One of the inputs into the service cost for school children is $17,000 per student. So we believe that fully covers, that the model is accurate on that. It overstates it slightly. And I think that's typical for all of our service cost side, that we tend to be on the conservative side with those forecasted in terms of those projections.
Other council members? Mr. Duncan and then Mr. Callan.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Anderson for his comments. I've always welcomed his thoughtful approach, and I think we're moving in a good direction. I understand your level of concern and apprehension. As they say, all politics is local, and I live right next to the spectrum, and perpendicular to my home is the garbage disposal area, which was built after we had already purchased our home. But it's not perfect, but it's okay. You take the good and the bad. On the other hand, there's Mad Fox now as a walking distance and a bunch of other things. So it has a way of evening out. The issue of the fiscal impact model, I've actually analyzed that model when the new one was being designed and provided by the consultants. And the 1.32 is definitely our number. That's not Rushmark's figure. I like the project. I think this is the type of project that we need. And I think we need to be clear going forward about the city's future and what type of development we are going to need going forward. The Winter Hill neighborhood will not be the last neighborhood that's going to be affected by development. Every developable area in the city that I can think of has some neighborhood around it. So there's always going to be neighborhood concerns. But my estimation, doing my own modeling, and that used to be what I did for a living, is that even if the school costs were to flatten out at a mid-single digit, the city still would not have enough money to survive without considerable additional income. So the issue for us, I don't think, is whether it's a thumbs up or down. The issue is what can we do to ameliorate and to make the projects work as best as we can. But we will need more economic development, period, or in a number of years, it'll be very difficult for Falls Church to sustain its independence. That's what we face, and there really is no way to, for me, as I see it, to get around that. So the idea is to make the best projects we can, but we have to have the economic development. As regards the issue of enrollment, I think my view of the increases in school budget, and I need to emphasize it's not the schools that I'm concerned about, it's the growth of the school budget. So I can hardly be seen as a cheerleader for this school board budget increases. However, I don't see the construction of this type of project with the characteristics that it has that are market-driven will have a material impact on the enrollment. It may delay the impacts of construction of a new school or something of that nature for a couple years, because the bulk of the new increases, as I understand it, is related to infill, not infill, but remodelings, demographic changes, et cetera. So what we would only accomplish by concentrating on that factor would be to delay the construction a year or two, maybe a fraction more, with no income. So we'll get the same numbers just a little later and with no income at all to help deal with the city's requirements. So for a whole variety of reasons, and And I believe the developer has done a good job in addressing our concerns, and I think there'll be some more conversations going forward. Converse all we want, but we have to vote by May 13th, and I think that's something we have to do. One way or the other, it's got to be voted on. Whatever we have accomplished at that point or ready to agree to accomplish to the future, that's the date that it has to take place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for that helpful analysis, Mr. Kalin. A lot there to take heed to, I think. I just wanted to ask one question about fiscal impact. The number that you cited, 17,000 per pupil expense, that's what feeds into our fiscal impact model for, like the annual throw-off of revenue, right?
Yeah, that's calculated as an annual operating cost. And so it's not a one-time thing.
Okay.
But we figure $17,000 per year per student.
Okay, and right now, I mean, that's a very, well, right now the numbers we're looking at per pupil are somewhere in the 14,000 range, is that right? So that number has a lot of cushion in it.
It does, but I would note a wrinkle to it is that we count the expense as the full school budget cost, including the money we get from the state, because the model also captures some of the revenue we get from the state because we have additional school-age children.
Okay, that helps explain.
It tries to balance that out.
Helps explain the difference between 14 and 17. Okay, and as Ms. Berry just intimated, the next area I want to go to is on attachment 3, number 3, schools. A voluntary contribution shall be made to the city to offset school capital costs. The contribution shall be calculated using a methodology based on per-student cost projection. Total contributions will be paid at the time of issuance of the first residential certificate of occupancy. So do we have a ballpark idea of what that number is? And that is a one-time upfront contribution to capital expense to build things. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And we have not calculated that number quite yet, or?
We're still in discussions with the developer about what that final proffer will be.
Okay.
The goal is for development to pay for development. That's our organizing principle here, and so what our perspective in the discussions is that there should be a proffer that would pay the city for the expected future capital costs.
Okay, enough said. We don't have to go into dark bargaining now. It's just helpful, I think, for the citizens to know that there is an annual benefit to these projects and there is a upfront one-time benefit, which, as Mr. Kalin said, we're going to have to build these schools anyway. If we stop building everything here in the city of Falls Church today, we would still have to build new schools. And the question is, how are we going to pay for them? 70% of the kids coming into our schools are coming from existing housing stock, mostly single-family and townhomes. The buildings built since 2003, Broadway, Byron, Pearson Square, Spectrum, they only generate 30% of the new students that have come into our schools in that period of time. So the money that we're getting from these buildings is more than compensating for the costs that they generate, all public service costs, and when we build them, they do come with upfront contributions that help us with our capital expenses, which we are going to have to undertake. One just last thing. I want to thank staff for the report on the history of grocery stores in Falls Church. It may seem a little off topic, but earlier in our discussion, some people said, I don't know if Falls Church can support a second grocery store. And I thought, well, you know what? We used to have a lot, even in my time here. And in fact, those of you who are history buffs, I do commend you to read it. It's very interesting. The last sentence says it's noteworthy that citizens of Falls Church during the last half of the 19th century had nearly 3 times the number of grocery stores that are operated in the city today. So there's that. And the second important point is all those little grocery stores went out of business. Why? Because they didn't provide the economies of scale that are necessary. See, I think it is a good thing that a company like Harris Teeter thinks our market has potential to support a full-service, proper supermarket to which people can walk. Some are going to drive, many are going to drive, many are going to walk. In the historic context of Falls Church, I think, it's sort of back to the future. We're doing something that has been part of Falls Church history, and I hope doing it better for the future. Thank you.
Other council members? Mayor Snyder?
Just very quickly, some data that was produced by the schools and was discussed at the League of Women Voters session, that the multi-unit student growth from 1989 to 2013 was 544, and that's about a third of the growth during that period of time. And while we can't control single-family homes that exist here, we can control the amount of multifamily residential units. But I look at this data, and others in the community look at it differently, but right now I think we've got some issues with this project which we want to work through with the developer, and we'll see where we come out. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Campbell?
Say for the record that I don't agree with the analysis that Mr. Snyder's put forward for the reasons I've already stated. So let's make the record to be clear on that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Galen. All right, I'm going to try to summarize some of the comments that we've heard this evening for the benefit of the public and the council members and certainly staff and the applicant. So it sounds like we may be making some progress on the left-hand turn on Broad Street. So if we can periodically get status updates on what's happening with some of these aspects through the boards and commissions process, Mr. Shields, I think that would be coming from you, however you think would be best. Two was possibly making some progress on the drive aisles and combining the residential and commercial traffic in one to move it. I think it would be closer to Maple is what we're talking about. The other issue that we heard a little bit about this evening from several speakers, and certainly the council's commented on it, is need for open space improvements, such as within the project itself and also in the surrounding areas, such as Big Chimneys Park. Parking issues, I think it may be helpful, none of us up here dive into the parking aspects, so I think at some point we want to try to get some further staff discussion at the appropriate time about the parking ratios and where we're headed, and make sure that the parking for this project works as well. Then there was discussion about traffic and movement of vehicles throughout the site and the possible need for traffic calming measures in the vicinity. There was some discussion about architecture and detail, and perhaps setting back is not the right word, but working on some of the edges of the architecture. One thing I'll note that I saw as we were going through the slides, and I know that we've left this as a placeholder a few times, and that there's some blank walls that are appearing on Annandale that need to still get reviewed. So as Mr. Bouchow suggested, I hope that's something that the Architectural Review Board works with the applicant about. I certainly don't want to get into it this evening other than point it out that that's one area that still appears to need work. On the economic analysis, some verification of the data that we're getting. The one thing I'll add to that discussion is we do have some metrics that have been put forward by the schools of targets, and the best way I can articulate it at this point is where the schools would like to be on a per pupil spending on the operating side. I don't know how that's marrying up with our model. And again, that may go into the range that we're looking at as far as the economic impact. So that's one piece of it. I think we need to get some more information and get a range on that front. And the same thing for the capital improvements as well. And finally, we heard comments about street art, which we haven't had a lot of discussion about, and that was Mr. Bouchow's comments. And certainly Anthony's, we have continued to get comments about the Anthony's restaurant and how this may fit into this project or others as well. So I think that's a quick summary of what I heard of some of the open issues. Yep. And certainly, I don't not want to acknowledge some of the progress that's been made as well. So, and I think we covered those with some of the loading issues and bringing those interior and some of the setbacks and addressing the buffers as well.
So
all right?
Can we go?
Yep. So let's move on to the next item. Ms. Bouchow, if you would read the next item. What I would suggest that we do is take the, actually, we may need to take a couple of these separately. So why don't we take the utility and stormwater separately, and then we can perhaps take the others together.
Okay, the next item is TO 13-05. Ordinance to amend Chapter 42 Utilities to revise sewer rates and fees as of July 1, 2013. Before you on first reading.
Council, this is an ordinance that's before you on first reading that would raise the base commodity charge for our sewer fees from $7.91 per thousand gallons to $8.62 per thousand gallons, a 9% increase. This is pursuant to the the recommendations of Municipal and Financial Services Group that were provided to the city back in 2010 and are driven by fixed costs that we've incurred to upgrade our treatment plants to meet EPA mandates for nitrogen and phosphate removal in terms of our emissions to the Chesapeake Bay. For the average customer in our system consumes about 12,000 to 15,000 gallons per quarter. And so the increase would be approximately $8.50 to $10.60 per quarter per 3-month billing period for that average customer. I'd be happy to answer any questions from the council.
Council, any questions on this? Mr. Duncan?
I feel like I have to thank you for the very helpful chart that lays that out since I asked at the work session for it. So that means that for the average user, the bill would increase less than $50 in a year if they use between $12,000 and $15,000.
That's correct.
Gallons, sorry. Thank you.
Yep. Other council members? Okay. If I can get a motion, and then I'll go ahead and open this item up. Ms. Berry?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt TO 13-05 on first reading, advertised according to law, and schedule second reading and public hearing for April 22nd, 2013.
If I can get a second?
Second.
Mr. Pepe on the second. I'd like to open this item up for public comment. Not seeing any public comments on this. Ms. Bashad, did we receive any written comments on this item? I'm going to go ahead and close this item for public comment. Council, any comments before we take a vote on this item? Okay. Ms. Bashad, if you'd call the roll.
On TO 13-05 on first reading, Ms. Berry?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Kalin?
Yes.
Mr. Pepe?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Tarter? Mayor Baruch?
Yes.
Thank you, council. That passes unanimously. The next item is TO 13-09, ordinance to create Article 7 Stormwater under Chapter 42 Utilities of the Falls Church City Code to establish a stormwater utility on first reading.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Thank you very much for the time to be here before you this evening. As you know, we started discussions about a watershed management plan back in 2009. That carried through to an adopted plan earlier this year, or last year now in 2012 in February. And then almost immediately thereafter, how to fund that plan was a topic of discussion, and there was a resolution by this body to charge the city manager to investigate a enterprise fund and potential revenue options for funding that fund. We have met several times, starting really significantly in October through now, and most recently we met on May 18th to discuss the item that is before you tonight. And what is before you is an ordinance that would establish a stormwater enterprise fund, and it does 4 things. It establishes the enterprise fund. That would be a dedicated fund for stormwater. Monies would come into that fund and be expended from that fund for stormwater only. The second thing it does is it creates the revenue option to, creates the revenue, the mechanism by which we would generate revenue for this fund, and that is through a billing of impervious cover based on 200 square foot units. The third thing it does is it establishes a mechanism to build a credit program, and that credit program, if you establish a permanent stormwater best management practice, or BMP, on your property, and it's properly built and properly maintained, you would get a break on your stormwater bill. And then it defines the billing process as a part of the real estate bill. So it would come as a line in your real estate bill, and that would come out twice a year. There were several, kind of 3 areas that were mentioned prior to our May 18th council work session that you charged us to go back and look at and provide some input to public comment. They were in, the first item was an appeal procedure. The second item was the amount of staffing that was associated with the program. Is it too limited? The third area were standards and transparencies. And then there was a fourth area that we talked about at length in the discussion, and that was on a credit program. And so I tried to address those in the staff report, and I'll just quickly go through those. The appeal procedure, the public comment was that should it really stop at the Director of Public Works, or should there be another body, another individual on staff, City Council? Should it go somewhere else beyond the Director of Public Works? And we're amenable for whatever you guys deem appropriate. I did provide a table to kind of benchmark against 4 other jurisdictions, and that was the City of Richmond, which after someone wishes for an adjustment to the Director of Public Works, there's no real appeal process before the legal court system. Virginia Beach is exactly the same way. Hampton, it goes to the director, and you can appeal from the director to the city manager. And then lastly, we looked at Prince William County, that goes to the Director of Public Works and then on to the Board of Supervisors. And again, we're amenable to whatever you deem appropriate. The question was limited staffing, and this was really in kind of the question was headed under limited staffing, but there were really 2 areas of concern. One was, how would the staff that's on site, if they're part-time and not full-time dedicated to stormwater, how do you keep track of what gets billed to the stormwater fund or gets billed to, say, the general fund? And this is, we describe this is worked out either formulaically or it's worked out on much like a consultant does and bills by the hour. Those are figured out at each individual staff person in consultation with the Chief Financial Officer's staff in finance. There are general accounting procedures. We adhere to what's recommended, and we either lay it out one of those 2 ways depending on the position. The second thing was that the question was, is there too limited amount of staff to be able to manage this, the administration portion of this program? And we compared it to the water and sewer program, and we compared it to the real estate program. And both of those areas, the real estate, they have 3 staff that deal with all of the technical issues associated with assessing properties throughout the year, and those 3 staff also deal with a appeals process. So we felt like what we're proposing is what is our recommendation for this. The second area was standards and transparency, and I think without question, one of the key tenets in how I'm managing our Public Works Department is through transparency. I think that people, regardless of what the rules are, what really frustrates people is not to know what the rules are. And as I mentioned in our staff report, our very first chapter of a public facilities manual will come out in the next month or so. That's all about transportation aspects. And we would start immediately on a similar chapter for stormwater. And while that public facilities manual is focused significantly on contractor concerns, it also would include anything that we chose that needed to be available to the public. And we would have that posted on our website and make that available. I also mentioned the watershed management plan. That is a public document. It is our roadmap. It is what is in there is available to anybody to see, and it guides how we're moving forward. And as I said, we spent 2.5 years discussing that in a public forum, and it lays out transparently how we're moving forward and how we got to this point today. The fourth area of topic was the credit program, and I included, this is not fully developed. We are moving through the development of this process. I included our draft paper with our consultant that talks about, kind of outlines the areas for a credit program. There is no question that as we put together a stormwater utility, the authorizing language in the state law says that we have to have a credit program. So it's not a choice. We want to do it. There's no question. We will do it. We're legally bound to do it. And in here, it talks about how we would move that process through. So those are the areas that were brought up last week. I'd be glad to discuss any questions you might have or issues further.
Council members, any questions? Mr. Kalin and then Mr. Barry.
Thank you for the presentation. Obviously, you know where I stand on the issue of utility and how to charge for it. But I was just curious in the implementation for condos, HOAs, how do you bill for common property? How is that addressed?
So it is addressed, and it may be, I may be able to point to it right now. Depending on how that property is held, sometimes you've got common areas that are held by the association. Sometimes that is divided out among each individual property. And we would bill those very similarly to the way we bill a single-family home. Although in this particular ordinance, there is a section, and I promise it's in here, even if I can't point to it immediately. There it is. It's on 268. It talks about if that general approach that we apply to commercial development as well as to single-family homes is better addressed through a specific condo association in the manner in which they would like to relay that out to their constituents, we can adjust for that on an individual basis. And it is not prescribed specifically in here, but in that each would be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. The homeowners association could come forward to us and say, while your approach for calculation of this bill and dividing it out to each individual property or us to as a whole is a concern for us, this is how we would like it done. We would entertain that and work through a process that is mutually agreeable.
Thank you. If I can just ask a follow-up to that. So what you're saying is either the association or the common ownership could get billed, and then they could bill it out and collect, or the city would do the billing based on whatever formula, as long as the city captured the total cost.
Exactly right. So if you've got a big condo building and it's filled with individual units inside and it's multi-story, well, the impervious surface is at the roof.
And the surface parking lots.
And the surface parking lots, right. And the garage, the top of the garage. And all of that may be held in common ownership. And do you send one bill to that common ownership and they divide it out based on the value of the unit, or do they have a different way and they would like individual bills billed out? And we certainly have the structure in this ordinance to work with each homeowners association to see that common property is billed accordingly. But we would be aiming to collect on every 200 square foot impervious cover piece.
Other council members, Ms. Berry?
I had a comment and a question. I like very much how this has been constructed, and thank you very much for this excellent staff work. My concern, and you're aware of this as well, is given limited staff resources, how staff will conduct reviews of best management practices and credits. It's going to be very interesting for you to be able to, go around to various folks who've built XYZ cistern and then say, yes, in a 2-year period, we can assess that you have done this. And, I mean, you're aware of that. I think it's critical that that be written into this document, but it's going to be interesting as to how staff is going to be able to, on a regular basis, assess best management practices. So that's just a commentary. And then
can I just comment on that?
Please.
Of what we're creating here, there's a lot that's new. What is not new is actually our requirement to go out and inspect best management practices and ensure their maintenance. This is actually part of our stormwater MS4 permit with the state, and we have 90 some odd best management practices that are recorded in the city there's a best management practice agreement, a BMP agreement that's recorded with a deed, and we have an index of where all of those are. And every year, according to our permit, we're obligated to go out. We have 2 inspectors to go out and inspect those and say they're performing in the manner expected. And we produce a report, and we send that report out, and it says you are in compliance, or you're not in compliance, and you have 30 days or 60 days to comply, to bring that up to snuff. In the program that we've laid out, one of the staff hires would be another inspector. That inspector, that we're not hiring that inspector to do solely BMP inspections. That inspector will be there to do the other work that's associated with building projects and putting pipes in the ground. But every year, that inspector, along with our other 2 inspectors, will continue to do that inspection program. And so really, of all the things we're doing, that's one we think we probably have in hand.
No, thank you. That's very, very good to know. And the second question I had to do with what bodies are exempted from fees, and I believe that starting on line 248, 250, would that answer my question? Cemeteries and are exempted, provided?
Cemeteries would be exempted provided they provide a nutrient management plan.
And when you say federal, state, or local government, that is, so the City of Falls Church, the city government of Falls Church is exempted insofar that it has a different stormwater discharge system.
We would not pay ourselves into this fund,
Okay.
and the schools would not. So TJ Elementary School in the city would not pay into the stormwater fund.
Because?
We would specifically exempt them on line 250.
Because you discharge separately, differently, not because they don't.
They fall under our MS4 permit, our municipal.
Okay. All right, that's it.
Yes.
Okay, yep.
Let me see if other council members have any more comments. Mr. Charter?
I have a question. I may have seen this before, but I didn't recall seeing it in your staff report. What's your estimate of the total staff cost per year of running this fund or this enterprise?
Your question is to do it as a utility versus to do it as a...
Just in general, like if you do it as a utility, if this starts off, we say yes to you on April whatever, and you go on your merry way, do you have an estimate of the total staff cost? You're saying we're going to divide our, we're going to have 80% of our time, we'll allocate it this way on, on a chart to have it go to staff or to go to this fund or go to the city side. Do you have an estimate of how much approximately your staff time is going to be billed or cost?
I do. I don't have it right here on my desk. I would like the opportunity to get that back to you. And I may just have it right here. It is $563,655.
More or less.
More or less.
And that's for just man-hours, not necessarily for, is that your total budget or your budget for personnel?
That's the budget for personnel plus $271,197 for benefits. And then, but the total budget is 1.706.
Gotcha. So, but in terms of just actual personnel cost, with benefits and all that, what is that number again? I'm sorry, it maybe slipped by me a little bit.
The personnel cost is 563 plus 271.
So is that about 800,000?
Yes.
And this is a question for the city manager. Is that amount being deducted from the city budget? In other words, that we're going to have $800,000 going to be billed separately to people in the city through this enterprise fund? Is that being deducted from the city side as far as expenditures?
The expenditures for stormwater are being pulled out of the general fund, but there are 2 things that are happening here. One, we're pulling it out of the general fund, but we're also trying to provide a higher level of service. And so the amount that's being pulled out of the general fund is about the equivalent of about 1 penny on the tax rate. It's not the higher level of service that we're proposing with this utility.
So you're pulling out $300 and some odd $1,000 from the city side. Your personnel costs are in the $800 or so range, and so I'm surmising that you have $500,000 in personnel costs for quote-unquote upgraded services. Is that fair to say?
That is absolutely fair to say. We see this stormwater budget in three parts. One is enhanced day-to-day operations. It actually brings a full-service, 4-person crew into the field to ensure that the stormwater system is cleaned, that we're making repairs, that we're building a better system. We also have some engineering and the engineering inspector I mentioned earlier. Those are there on a day-to-day basis to enhance the service that you get from the existing system and to make repairs. Two other areas are both capital. One is the capital cost to rehabilitate, refurbish the existing system, to make it work as we want it to work. We know we need to carry more stormwater. We know that we have aging pipes. We figure that's about $80 million over the next 50 years. The third area is to meet our federal obligation under the Chesapeake Bay program, which is $1 million per year to build the system needed over the next 15 years. So those are the three areas, and they are, in all areas, that is an expansion of the current program.
$1,000 in extra personnel cost. How many people are you going to be hiring, or do you anticipate hiring?
There is, and of course I did not bring that document before me tonight, but it would include so right now there's 9.2 FTEs in the Stormwater Enterprise Fund as proposed. That includes 0.25 of the director's time that already exists. It includes 1 FTE of an engineer that exists today, or a half FTE that's in that budget. It also includes 0.25 of the superintendent, our operational side, that is there today. And all the rest, I think, are new. It includes some contract, 0.2 of a contract manager that exists on staff today.
Hiring?
So it's about 7.
7 new employees.
Give or take the math I'm doing in my head on the spot. But absolutely, we are before you to talk those sides of the budget here in another week, and I'll be glad to talk those through. I will have that at my fingertips then.
But I think it's relevant for tonight, separate from a budget issue. This is a separate issue of where we're going to establish a new enterprise fund. And I think it's relevant to know what staffing and what costs are associated with that for tonight's discussion. So
yes, it is approximately 7 individuals.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
2 issues. One, I guess to round out your point, Dave, the other question is, would it be any different if you were to provide the upgraded service, not in the utility? Would it actually change the number of people you need for a specific level of service? You don't have to answer that right now, but that I think has to be the question you're really getting at. The other thing is, some of the people on Great Falls who lived through, apparently, before my time, the construction of the community center are worried. What limits the city's ability or constraints to expand impervious surface on the City Hall campus as it runs off into the flood zone on Great Falls? If the city and TJ is exempt, what other mechanisms are there to ensure that the proper stormwater management is taking place in those formal, not I have to tell you, this is not a across the board conversation. What formal written documentation do you have? And if we could get that to the council or to me, certainly, I'd like to have that.
The current city ordinance requires 2 things in regards to stormwater every time you build. The first thing is we need to comply with our Chesapeake Bay ordinance, which is significantly about water quality. And so you build best management practices to ensure that you've met your pollutant load problem. The second thing is that you have to make sure that your discharge, after you build the new stuff, it doesn't limit the amount of impervious cover you can put on the property, although there's zoning laws that do limit that, but on a commercial property that's different, and quite frankly that's managed in the zoning office and not through my office. But what we do is we look at the existing impervious cover and the proposed impervious cover, and we calculate how much runoff runs off before and would happen after. And then you have to build a best management practice to ensure that afterwards the same discharge as before occurs. And so we use that BMP, or best management practice, in two ways. One is the water quality side, and the second is the water quantity side. It's all the same water, but it affects folks in a different way.
The question really is, okay, what they would say, I'm trying to play devil's advocate because it's not really a specific concern of mine, but okay, the city's supposed to do that and it doesn't. What happens?
Well, I think everybody would hold us accountable for that. I mean, I think that's in the code, and you hire staff to follow the code, and that's what we do.
But I mean, given the long history of stormwater in Falls Church and the feeling that of lack of attention to this topic, et cetera, it may be useful to think about what specifically is there to make sure that the city actually follows its own best practices, rather than, trust us. That trust us is sort of, generally speaking, not with you or anybody else, but it gets harder and harder as we move forward in tight budgetary times to.
Sure. I'd like to make two comments. One is that the code is the law as far as we're concerned, and so we believe that that's what we do. And the city attorney, we get in a lot of trouble if we don't, because we have to answer to him and the city manager. The second thing, you mentioned the community center specifically, and I want to go back and talk about transparency a little bit. One of the key projects in the watershed management plan is the improvement on City Hall campus. It's tied to the problems on Great Falls Street just down below. And we are actively working that project. We have a conceptual design that we're working through bid documents right now, which we expect to go to bid this summer for construction in the fall. That project is underway, and it will change what happens downstream from City Hall. So specifically related to that, there is trust us, but we have this transparent document that's called the Watershed Management Plan, and we are following through with what we were tasked to do.
Thank you. Mr. Kalin is going down a very important road, I think. I mean, we all have the highest confidence, I think, in staff, and we all know this is a very important issue, and yet, we're doing something big here, something historic. We're creating something in apparently less than a month that is hopefully going to be permanent and lasting, and the optics of all that have to be right on. I mean, it's difficult to go to people and say, yeah, we're passing this new tax and we're exempting the city from it, particularly if you're talking to somebody who has some issues about downstream from, fill in the blank, City Hall, TJ, whatever. You've already spoken to it, but it is a concern that I have. I wanted to go back to the path that Mr. Tarter was on. And again, all this is in every attempt to be as constructive and helpful as possible. $834,000, I think, is the number that you listed for personnel and benefits. And then there was a $1.706 million figure. What was that 1.7 million?
That's the total expenditures?
In the first year?
Yes.
So does that mean that roughly 834 goes for personnel and benefits and roughly 800 something goes for digging around in the ground? Is that what that amounts to?
Right. So you've got operational expenses include your salaries and benefits, but they also include we do some things by contract work, and so there's money there to bring in a contractor to help do the bigger projects, to survey, to do those things that we don't have in-house skills to do right now. And then we have, it's roughly $2 million, one for quality, one for quantity, or conveyance in the capital budget that's debt funded. So.
Okay, I think it will be helpful to go into more detail on this when we are talking about the budget side of it, but I do agree with Mr. Tarter that understanding the budget aspect of it weighs into whether I think it's ready to be, approved on reading. I guess the question I'd like to ask at that meeting is the effort that you would expend in the year one as you map it out here compares to what we would have done otherwise had we not done anything different or new. I mean, I think it would be helpful to explain to people what they're getting more of if we go this route. Okay, let me just run through some quick things. Outreach to religious institutions, Reverend Kirkland's letter. I think I've heard there's a meeting scheduled after Easter with the religious institutions, leaderships in town, and that's interesting to hear, and I'd like to know more about what we think we're going to hear from them and tell them. Outreach to the business community. Chris Bergen, who's chair of the Chamber of Commerce, tax analysts, said, he has people on staff who are experts on these kind of, municipal taxation issues all across the country and volunteered their services to, contribute to the dialogue. I think those two communities are both important to bring into the discussion here. The administrative concerns, I get emails, people, they're not going to be enough staff, the billing isn't going to work. When we did the tax rebate last year, that was going to be a big mess, and now we're going to institutionalize adding something onto the tax bill, as I understand. And, I just have to trust, I guess, that I know you're competent to get it right, but it is a lot to get right in a pretty short amount of time, I think. But, the billing question, it's going to go on property tax bills. Institutions that are tax exempt don't get property tax bills, so they'll get a separate bill. And by the way, that leads me to a question. If we are exempting the city and we're exempting, and we're capturing apartments and so forth, who new are we picking up in terms of revenue we're generating who would otherwise not pay into this now through property taxes? Is it the religious institutions? Is there any other entity that we're getting money from that we're not getting money from now to help with this?
It is the nonprofits, and I think those are significantly the religious institutions.
Okay, all right, well, that's helpful to know, I think. What about the Housing Corporation? Do they have any expenses related to this on Winter Hill, or?
They would, and so I think probably the most accurate way to say it would be those properties that are currently tax exempt, unless it's a federal property owner or a state property owner, they would be subject to this fee.
Okay, and finally, just a higher altitude concern. Here's my worry, and it's kind of a longer term worry, I guess. We're going to start charging people a separate fee for this new service, and we're going to do great things. But the list of the great things we're going to do by our own accounting takes some number of years to get around to. Unfortunately, when the rain falls, it all falls at once, and it falls on everybody. And, as soon as people start paying into this Stormwater Enterprise Fund, they're going to understand why their basement is flooding. I paid my money, how come my basement's flooding? And that's why, to me, the messaging part of this and making sure people understand, if we're going to go this route, that we're not going to solve all your problems quickly. In fact, it's going to take, maybe up to 10 years. I mean, I asked you this earlier. You were very candid. You said, I'm not going to promise that I'm going to cure your basement flooding problem. I applaud that candor. But at the same time, we're going to charge a separate fee for this. And I think people have an expectation of a level of service that they maybe don't have now. And we are going to get, whoever's sitting on council at the time, as soon as the rain falls, are going to be flooded with, complaints. We're paying this money, why aren't we getting it? And that leads me just to ask, question that I've heard others say, which is, if this is a $10 million problem, pick a number, $15 million problem, if it's that big a problem, it's like the equivalent of we need a new school. It's not quite that big, but it's pretty big. Why would we not discuss, at least, bonding all of it now and staffing through external sources, contractors to whom we don't have to pay benefits, to get the work done in, you pick a number, 5 years instead of 10, 7 instead of 15. And I don't, I guess I'd like to understand that better before I feel like I could, proceed with what we've been given so far. Thank you very much.
Mr. Pepe?
Well, I understand some of the concerns that are being raised, but I think you got to put this in the perspective of what the alternatives are. The alternative right now is to do nothing and the problems continue and nothing happens. The other alternative is to raise taxes, and if you really want to be sure, part of the concern is this money, A, that we have enough revenue to do something, and B, that the money is guaranteed to go towards doing these things. This is the only way to do it. Otherwise, you really are playing the trust me game of let's add 4 or 5 cents on the tax rate, and we might use it for that, but something else might come up. This is the only way to make sure these things get addressed. In terms of who's paying it, the concept, and this is a philosophical one, but I 100% buy into the fact that the story that those who create the problem pay for the problem. And that's what this says. The more impervious surface, the more runoff you cause, the more you pay for it. I know some people philosophically don't think so. They think we should all share equally and share the burden regardless of what we do, but that's the reason you would do it on that basis. In terms of bonding, there may be projects that need to be bonded and things like that need to be worked in, but it's an ongoing problem. This kind of runoff issue is not the kind of thing that you just fix once and it goes away, and that's how we got into this mess, because you'd have these big works projects, and then it'd be another 50 years before you'd have more works projects, and in the meantime, you had lots of problems. I can tell you, I deal with our facilities. We operate 14 plants across the U.S., and in almost every single one of them, this is the way they're doing things across the country right now, because everybody is having to deal with these issues, dealing with quality issues and runoff issues, and this pretty much comes down to what they determine the fair way to do it. With one exception, in I think it's Washington State, they're billing us based on the income we make at the property. So there's another approach, take it from those, and that's probably influenced by what's happening in Washington more than anything, if they think they can just take it from anybody who's making money as opposed to who's causing the problem. So that's why I support, let's approve this on first reading. I'm sure there's some details to be tinkered with and worked out, but it's time to get moving on it.
Other council members? Mr. Callen?
I'd like to fully associate myself with what Ron just said. Fully supported this. I raised the point really for a constituent, not for my own concern. Just take it in, see how you can factor that type of issue into it. In terms of the billing, I think we can work out the administrative issues and what's visually the best way to present it and figure out how much that costs to do. The issue of bonding and cost, I mean, it's 10 years because we scaled back the original program. If we want to pay more now, we can do it in fewer years. So, I mean, that was our call to start it out smaller. So if we're not willing to fund the utility, do it in 5 years, then we can't say it's the utility's fault. It's the fact that we're funding at a certain rate. And as far as bonding goes, you can't borrow, let me rephrase it, you shouldn't borrow unless you have a specific project that you're ready to implement, because if you borrow the money, you have to put it somewhere because you're still paying principal and interest, and there's no project that's being created to justify that expense. It's called the cost of carrying the cash, and it can be very expensive. So you should time your capital expenditures with your capital construction. Thank you.
Anything else? I want to make sure that we have public comment time on this. So, yeah. And I too wanted to associate myself with Mr. Pepe's comments, so I have nothing further to add. The only thing I would just say is one of the concerns that I had is the implementation timeline and not having the resolution that provides the credits or the ability to get credits. And I'm satisfied with what Mr. Hicks told us this evening, that, as I understand it, under the state statute, we can't move forward without it. So I'm not going to ask for amendments to this based on what I heard this evening. But if we can just clarify that in the staff report as we move forward and in public discussion. I think when you read it, it does seem like trust us, but once you look at it and hear the explanation of we're actually required to do it under state code, it makes sense. But that was not clear on my first reading, since I wasn't fully versant in the underlying code. Vice Mayor Snyder.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Since we're laying out questions right now from the council, I guess the first thing is that I think it's very important to keep explaining why we're doing what we're doing, which is result of climate change and Chesapeake Bay requirements and demands on the system that it wasn't built to maintain. Second thing is on credits. I agree with what the mayor just said. One of the most positive elements of this program is you have the ability to do some things that reduce your costs. So I think it's very important to flesh that out and make that a robust program. Third, in terms of billing, for those who may do tax deductions, I still want to explore how do we build this in a way that maximizes their ability to deduct their costs, whether on the commercial side or the personal side. And then finally, interesting discussion tonight about the number of employees that are going to be added, and of course that'll bring pension costs and everything else along with it. I'd just like some assurance that we are going about producing these projects that we're doing, the actual work at the end of the day that is intended to address the problems, is that this proposal is absolutely the most efficient way to do that.
I think this is a question for staff, so let's take that before we have other council member comments. Mr. Hicks, do you want to address that last point?
That this is the most efficient way to do this, as opposed to raising the tax rate. Is that, just for clarification, is that the question?
It's not a billing question. It's the overall structure of the program with the number of employees and whatever. Have we done a cost-benefit analysis vis-a-vis, for example, contracting out for that expertise or whatever, so that in order to produce the work, the ultimate projects, the improvements that people are ultimately paying for, are we producing those improvements in the most cost-effective way in the short term and the long term?
We absolutely did that work. As we were working since October with you guys to kind of develop the cost side of the model before we get to the rate model, we went through and we said, this is our proposed plan, and we met with you guys, and it was very uncomfortable, and I think that we were charged to go back and look, are there ways to leverage existing work? Are there ways to trim this down? And we did that, and we met with the Finance Committee, the subcommittee on council, and we tried to lay that out. And we do believe that in-house, that what we can do here is the best of all the worlds, that you get the level of service that we laid out in the report card. You have in-house forces that can be there on a day-to-day basis, can respond to storms. The storm comes in, we've got the guys who can be there and resolve issues. And instead of having a crew that can put in 60-inch pipe once every 5 years, those sorts of projects are contracted out, and there's money in the budget for those contracted forces, so we don't now need to own a track hoe and all of the things associated with the things that we're going to do on a very limited basis. We do think that this gives you everything that we've laid out in terms of benefit as we described it coming into this.
And I take it, since my question was cost benefit, that this is the least costly way to produce the end result.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I can get a motion, please. Mr. Kalin. Sorry. I'll make you make the motion to go past 10:30 as well.
Okay. But I'm going to continue, because what Mr. Snyder has suggested is absolutely contrary to the utility fee. So we have to get this straight. And I fully agree with Mr. Pepe's view. If we go down the issue of tax rates and how we can be beneficial in tax rates, the whole idea of a user fee disappears and we're in a different ballgame. They're not compatible. We can't be looking at both per se, because they have totally different. If we want utility fund fee structure, as again, as Mr. Pepe has indicated, for the reasons he's indicated, that's one way. If we're going down the other path of tax deductions, that takes you to a different place. They're not compatible approaches. Thank you.
If I can get a motion, please.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt TO 13-09 on first reading, schedule public hearing and second reading for April 22nd, 2013, and advertise the same according to law.
Thank you. If I can get a second?
Second.
Is Mr. Kalin on the second? I'd like to open this item up for any public comment. Are there any members of the public that wish to address this item? Not seeing any. Ms. Bichad, did we receive any written comments? I believe that we had discussed them and had received. Yeah, and I think Ms. Bichad summarized those earlier. I'm going to go ahead and close this item up for public comment. Council, anything else? I think we went around on this, so why don't we have the roll call vote, please?
On TO 13-09 on first reading, Ms. Berry?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
No.
Mr. Kalin?
Yes.
Mr. Pepe?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Tarter?
Yes.
Mayor Baruch?
Yes.
Thank you, Council. The next item before you,
Ms. Bichad, before you read those, what I would suggest doing is combining 3, 4, and 5 for the purposes of reading and discussion, and then we'll vote on them separately.
absolutely. The next item before you regarding the budget. TO 13-07, an ordinance fixing and determining the budget of expenditures and revenues, appropriating funds for the fiscal year 2014, general fund, school operating fund, school community service fund, and school food service fund, water fund, sewer fund, and enterprise fund, and affordable housing fund. The next item is TO 13-08, an ordinance fixing and determining the FY 2014 to FY 2018 capital improvements program budget and appropriating expenditure and revenue funds for the fiscal year 2014, and TO 13-06, an ordinance setting the rate of the tax levy on real estate, personal property, machinery, and tools, and all other property segregated by law for local taxation in the city of Falls Church, Virginia, for the tax year 2013.
Thank you, Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor Baruch, members of council. Before I speak to these 3 items, just one last thing on stormwater. If I could just note that we do have an event planned on Wednesday, April 3rd at 7 p.m. at the Community Center, sponsored by the Environmental Services Council, to have questions and answers. Staff will be present at that meeting to talk about the stormwater utility. And again, it's a town hall meeting on the stormwater utility sponsored by the Environmental Services Council on April 3rd at 7 p.m. at the Community Center.
Thank you, Mr. Shields.
The 3 items that the clerk just read off, we have the budget ordinance, then we have the CIP ordinance, and then we have the ordinance setting the rate and tax levy on real estate and personal property. The 3 will have a public hearing on them together. With respect to the budget, I presented an overview of the budget 2 weeks ago, and we have a series of work sessions that we'll have between now and April 22nd, where we'll go through the budget in detail. We will also have a Saturday town hall meeting on Saturday, April 13th, where we'll talk about this budget, the tax rate, and the stormwater utility as well, and that's April 13th at 10 a.m. on Saturday, also at the Community Center. This budget, a couple notes on it. It does incorporate the school board's request. The budget has a general government growth of approximately 3.9% over FY13. And it does leave out certain items that were not funded, which have traditionally been funded in the school board budget. And those include the funding for cable television, a revenue item that the schools counted on in their budget from the city's Rec and Parks Division for the use of school facilities. And we'll need to have some further discussion with the school board on the funding for the QSCAB bond for the TJ Elementary School. For the budget ordinance, it can change between first reading and second reading, and the expectation is that it goes through the public process. It will change. Similarly, for the CIP, the CIP ordinance reflects my recommendations to the City Council on the CIP. There's also a Planning Commission recommendation on the CIP, which is aligned with my recommendation in all respects, except for they have a slightly different recommendation with respect to the schools proceeding with the Cherry Avenue preschool project. The tax ordinance, what has been advertised is a tax rate of $1.41, which is an increase over the current rate of $1.33. The reason for that advertised rate is to provide the City Council with additional flexibility. And the increase in the tax rate has several components to it. One is 6 cents to fully fund the school board's request. One element of it is 2 cents to deal with the, quote, the orphans that were not funded by the school board, which had traditionally been funded by the school board. And then lastly, there's 6 cents on the tax rate to provide the City Council with flexibility that if at the end of the day, the council decides not to create the stormwater utility, you would still have the option to provide that same level of service through the ad valorem tax rate. For any of those, the discussion tonight will be the council will need to vote on first reading on a tax rate, which will then set the stage. The tax rate cannot go any higher between now and April 22nd without triggering a new first reading. But if the council proceeds at a certain rate, it can be reduced between first reading and second reading. That's an overview of the items. I'm not going into great detail on the items in the budget because we have many hours of time to do that in alternate venues, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Council, any questions? No questions? Why don't I get a motion on the first item, and then, actually, if I can get a motion on all three, if that's acceptable to council members, and then we'll go ahead and open it up. Can we do that, Mr. Foster?
You're going to need to have a motion and a second on each individual motion.
Right, and then open all three up? Yep, that's what I prefer to do. And then we all vote each one separately. Mr. Kalen?
I'll just do one.
Just do one at a time, and you'll need a second after each one.
Okay. An ordinance fixing and determining the budget of expenditures, or TR 13-7, expenditures and revenues, appropriating funds for the fiscal year 2014, general fund, school operating fund, school community service fund, and school food service fund, water fund, sewer fund, and enterprise fund, and affordable housing fund. I move to adopt. Actually, I just wanted to hear myself say that.
Okay, I think Kathy's gonna,
Council, if you look at the
I move
proposed
to adopt, okay.
motion, and just read the proposed motion, and it also tells you about second reading, and if you
yeah,
just read that,
we need the actual
then we're
proposed
covered. So
motion.
if you want to just read that, Mr. Kalen, that'll really help me out.
On first reading, scheduled public hearings on April 8th and April 22nd, 2013.
You just need to say, I move
Once you
to
do it,
adopt.
you can do it.
Remedy. Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt TO 13-07 on first reading. Schedule public hearings on April 8th and April 22nd, 2013.
If I can get a second, please.
Mr. Kalen, do you want to second that?
It's Mr. Duncan on the second.
Fighting, I second it.
This is almost like a marital discussion.
All right, Mr. Kalen, you will not be moving anything else
Oh,
this
I'm
evening.
out of it. I'm out of it now.
I think that's
If I can
fine idea.
have a motion for 1308.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt TO 13-08 on first reading. Schedule public hearings for March 27th and April 8th and April 22nd, 2013. Second reading and adoption on April 22nd, 2013. Advertise the same according to law and refer item, I think, to the Planning Commission, School Board, Library Board of Trustees, Recreation and Parks Advisory Board, Environmental Services Council, and the Falls Church Volunteer Fire Department.
Thank you. If I can get a second?
Can you
Mr.
handle that?
A second, how am I doing?
You got it. That's good. It's all good.
Oh,
Thank
boy.
you.
All right, we're on 13-06. If I can get a motion, please.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt TO 13-06 on first reading. Schedule public hearings on March 27th, April 8th, April 22nd, and second reading and adoption on April 22nd, 2013, and advertise the same according to law.
Thank you. If I can get a second. That's Mr. Kalen on the second.
Thank you, Mr. Kalen.
All right. I'd like to open these items, all three items, up for public comment. We'll take public comment on all three, but then vote separately. I've got one speaker slip. That's Mr. Pat Gianelli, who I think just stepped out. Pat, are you out there? Thank you, Cindy. Let's just hold just a moment. All right, are there any other members of the public that wish to address this item?
No.
Okay. Ms. Bashad, did we receive any public comments in writing that you, other than what you summarized?
What was in the summary?
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and close this item up for public comment and open it up for council discussion. Council members? Vice Mayor Snyder, then Ms. Berry. Ms. Berry, then Mr. Count. Vice Mayor Snyder.
Mr. Shields, I was curious as to, and thank you for anticipating the question I had about the orphan projects that the memo from School Board March 15, 2013 referenced. What is the process for bringing those orphan projects back into the fold? What is the process for either including them in the school budget or dealing with them in some manner?
Well, I think each one is a special case. And when we have a work session, we'll provide some recommendations on how to handle each one. But I think the one that probably stands out as the clearest budget problem is the cable television item, which is about $170,000. And in that, the council would essentially have three choices: to increase revenues to above the $1.33 rate to pay for the cable television item, and then either house it in general government or house it with the schools. Or the council could say, we want it to be funded. It needs to come out of reductions in spending in either the general government or the schools. Those are your options. We have done some initial review with the school staff on this. It is our recommendation that we think it's best housed with the schools, that that's the cleanest place to administer it. But we can go into more detail on that discussion at work session.
Mr. Snyder?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just hopefully to sort of provide one sort of an, structural analysis to the budget and the tax rate. We're sort of looking at the following building blocks that went into the budget. The first is the school request, and the second is the city request. And then the orphan projects, a major one being the Falls Church City TV station. And then the stormwater, which will either be in the tax rate, or if it's not in the tax rate, then it reduces the tax rate by about 5 cents, 5.5 cents, but there's an alternative way of paying for that, which is the fees. And we're not playing a budget game. It's just the reality is there are several different ways to pay to get the job done. And so we're being perfectly transparent about that. People will pay for the needed infrastructure to preserve the city in the future. So, and then we have the CIP component. So over the next few weeks, and we've already started, we'll be looking at each of these components. In terms of the tax rate itself, The 133, as proposed, covers the school request without change, and the city request and the CIP as recommended. And then the stormwater is an additional 5.5 cents. There is, and the 141 then, a 3 cent point where you could, you would need that if you didn't cut the schools of the city. You would need to add to the 133 to cover the orphan projects or make other cuts elsewhere. So I guess, I mean, I'm really starting off with the assumption that the tax rate really with the water in it is actually, in my view, I would much prefer a 139 as opposed to 141 to send a signal that we're not going up, and we may actually go lower than that. Without the stormwater, then the rate would be roughly 134. So I just sort of trying to lay this out and understanding so that the people understand what's in the 141. It's the 133 to fund the schools in the city as requested in the CIP. There's an additional 3 cents that we can cut or not. And then the difference in the 141 is for the stormwater work. So to me, we're going to get below 141 if you include the water in it. If you take the water out, we ought to be able to get lower than the 136. Thank you.
Other council members, and I'll sort of throw my 2 cents in of sort of the range that I'm looking at right now. And again, you know, I want to maintain some flexibility on the stormwater issue. I'm certainly supportive of doing the enterprise fund, but we haven't gone fully through that process. But certainly my thinking is that that's probably the most equitable, best way to handle that item. What that means is that that would remove essentially 5 cents off the advertised tax rate. I'm committed to doing the cable, which I believe is about $0.015. So I think the range that I'm looking at this point, just so other council members are aware, is the current tax rate of 127 to about 134, 134 and a half is the range. If I'm doing my math correctly, Mr. Shields, you're looking at me strangely that I may have the math wrong.
Oh, just note the cable television is about half a penny.
I'm sorry, half cent. So that would get us to about 133 and a half. Is that about right? So that's roughly the range I'm looking at of where the delta is and the span. Maybe a bit more if we needed to manage other items that aren't being handled on the city side. So, Mr. Callen?
Forgive me, this arithmetic is a little hard to follow somewhat. But I was under the impression that it was $0.015 on the tax rate, and now it's half.
I'm sorry, I thought the question was specifically the cable television.
I wasn't talking about the other orphaned items.
The other, this is, okay.
Yeah, all of the orphaned items are 2 cents. The cable is a half cent.
Okay, so why did we, okay, let's.
Here's the reason why I'm not addressing that other one is I'm not sure we have to. You know, and to be honest, it's an issue of budgets and how the money's moving around and who's going to absorb it. So
that's why, but I was prepared to go with the city manager's suggestion, you know, for the 141 and Bill.
I'm not. My comments were not on that point. My comments were the range that I'm ultimately looking at of where my thinking is for the benefit of the council. But for the advertised rate, I'm fine with going and giving ourselves the flexibility that we need at this point.
Because I really get uncomfortable with doing the arithmetic at the table. Unless there was a separate written proposal submitted before, I would prefer to leave it as it is. as I'm not sure I understand all of your, the little pieces. So I just assume leave it as it is, and we can, because we're not committed to 141 as the rate, that's just the max. And it probably will be a little bit less, hopefully, but to go forward, just as a point of discussion.
Yeah, let me
I
try
don't
to,
have a problem with it.
let me clarify this again. I want to move forward with the 141 as the discussion point.
Okay.
But at some point soon, we're gonna have to start talking numbers of where people are gonna land. And I'm leading that discussion by saying the range that I'm looking at right now as one council member is between $1.27 and $1.31, $1.35 range after we go through the process right now. And again, this is very preliminary, but we need to start having those discussions amongst ourselves and with the public as we start focusing and narrowing the items that we're gonna pay for at the end of the day. This is my way of saying, these are sort of the guideposts. We'll work it through the process, have the public discussion, have the discussion amongst ourselves, but at some point, we need to talk dollars and cents. But right now, I'm not prepared to do that. That's why I am gonna support the $1.41 advertised rate. Vice Mayor Snyder?
I would agree fundamentally with your comments, although I would prefer a 139 tax rate. Is there any desire to do that now? Okay, that wouldn't be seconded by anybody. Thank you.
Other council members?
I mean, if the question was, would anyone support a lower advertised rate, I wouldn't. Well, I mean, I think that's the question. Are we going to vote for 139 or 141? Mr. Snyder's put that on the table, and his question was, would anybody else support it? And my answer is, I would support advertising 139 versus 141. I would also, could I continue, or would you?
Please, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I would also ask maybe if the city manager could take a hard look at the city budget and come back and propose some possible cost savings to us.
No.
Well, okay.
Let's have Mr. Tarter finish his thoughts, and we'll go through.
We've got some hard choices to make here, and the question is whether we're going to give the schools less than they asked for, whether we're going to raise taxes more than a lot of folks would like to do, or whether we're going to take a hard look at the city budget, or some combination of all of those things. So I'm not willing at this point to take off the table the city budget and say, okay, well, we're either going to raise taxes a whole lot, or we're going to give the schools less than they want. I think that it ought to be on the table. I, for one, would like to have that discussion.
Other council members? Ms. Berry and then Mr. Cameron.
Mr. Charter, that's exactly right. You know, we've said this all along. There are only X number of levers that you can pull, you know? It's tax rate, it's school expense drivers, it's city drivers, et cetera. But for purposes of this meeting, it seems premature to talk about any numbers because we really haven't gone through the full budget discussion. 141 is a perfectly, I mean, it's a number, it's a perfectly acceptable range. Who wouldn't want a lower tax rate? Of course everyone wants a lower tax rate. We've got to look at the numbers. And the school, and in my strong view, and it will not come as any surprise to anybody, I am extremely reluctant to ask the city staff to cut anything. Staff has come in at a modest, to the point of perhaps dangerously modest budget level. We've had this conversation before. We have said in our work sessions that what the city side has done isn't even, as we say, treading water. It's underwater, and I think it is to our detriment if we ask the city side to balance the budget, because I don't think we can do that. And so, Mr. Tarter, does this mean that maybe we won't fund the schools their entire amount? Sure. That's exactly what it means. That's exactly what it means from this perch anyway. But I think that we are doing a tremendous disservice when we continue to balance the budget on the city side. I think we've learned that lesson. We don't want to go down that road.
Mr. Cameron?
This is also part of the budget guidance, and this is a very critical point. What Mr. Shields could do, and this is consistent with that request, and this is something that yours truly has been raising since the summer, this is old news, Dave, is that if there are going to be, you want to know what programs we would have to reduce or eliminate to make the cuts work, then that can be asked. But then the council has to take the responsibility, because the city manager does not have the authority to change the vision of the city. We already discussed if it was a marginal amount, that's one thing, but we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars here in difference. So yes, he can tell us what it would take to get the cuts and what programs would have to be reduced or eliminated, but they're not a recommendation, because at the end of the day, what we do here is we tell the city manager, reduce it by a certain amount, and we just give it an order. I've seen this before. Comes back, pretty savage cuts, and then we blame the city manager for making the cuts. No, we have to be responsible for that, and not the city manager. That's our responsibility, Dave.
Other council members? Let's go to Mr. Duncan, and then we'll come back.
Could I just ask a question? At 141, what is the average $600,000 house paying as compared to what it pays at 127? Do you have that information?
I think that's in the ad.
I believe it is too, which is why I thought maybe you might. So 14-cent increase on a $600,000 house.
I think I need to get back with you on it. There's no question.
Yeah, I think it's.
As Mr. Kalin said, it's real coffee.
It's real coffee. I think it is something along the order of $800, I believe. Okay, well, we can generally agree with that. Okay, thanks for that. I'm still listening here. I guess I'd like to hear what Mr. Tarter has to say.
Mr. Tarter?
What I would say is that we're here now, as I've been accused of, let's wait till the numbers come in before we give some guidance, but I mean, we need to have that information. There may be cuts on the city side that we can do that would allow us to keep our tax rate in a more reasonable rate. I don't think we ought to just say, hey, listen, the city side is off the table. And I think that's what you're suggesting. We will not consider any reductions in the city side, and therefore we're going to be raising taxes more than some might want, or funding the schools less than some might want. And I don't think at this point in time we ought to be prejudging what the ultimate mix of this is going to be. I think we need more information. I'd like some more from the city manager.
Other council members?
We need to go past 10:30?
Yes. If I can just have a motion to go past 10:30. Mr. Kalin, do you want to make the motion?
Mr. Kalin, do you want to make the
I'll
motion?
make the motion. Do we go past 10:30?
If I can have a second.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We're going past 10:30. Vice Mayor Snyder.
Thanks a lot. Well, interesting discussion. We've got a great few weeks ahead of us, as you can tell.
It's going to be lovely.
Character building opportunity.
That's it. Yeah. My interest in the 139 rate is to try to send a signal, at least let's make clear that it doesn't get worse than it is now, in terms of sort of people coming up with new wish lists and that sort of thing. So that's why I propose the 139. I'm willing to move it if anybody will second it, but I do agree that I like sort of the mayor. My initial analysis is very similar to the mayor's. So, in any event, thank you.
Other council members? Yeah. What's that? Yeah, we're going. Yeah. Why don't we,
Can
I think.
get a comment in? I move for the,
Yeah.
so I get to make my comment.
Council, could I have a clearer motion on that so that we have it for the record?
I'm sorry, which motion?
Well, we just have the three that were read earlier. We don't have anything else.
Okay, I wasn't sure if we had another motion, Mr. Snyder was
Just to move
talking
past
about.
the 10:30.
Okay, I got that.
Okay.
We're good.
Mr. Kalin?
I'd like to say that I agree with what Ms. Barry said regarding my view of what the minimum should be for the city side. That having been said, if there is a will on the council, and again, I strongly agree with Ms. Barry on this, but if there's a will on the council to cut on the city side, I have to insist that the city manager let us know what programs are going to be cut and that the city council take responsibility for those cuts, not lay it on the city manager as if he were recommending these reductions. That's my point there.
And just to add to that a little bit, one way that to manage that approach, again, this is why I tried to lay out some possible ranges, and again, nobody is, well, it's not that it's, we need to, at some point soon, talk about these ranges. We sort of have gone around, we tried to structure the guidance in a way that we don't wait till last minute. I've heard numerous council members say that they're not at $1.41 at the end of the day, but we haven't talked about sort of what the range is. We need to start having that discussion, figuring out what the school piece is going to look like, because that is a large driver, it's 6 cents. And then figuring out where folks are at with the ultimate tax rate and working it through that way. And if members are feeling that they want to fully support the school request and they want to make cuts somewhere else, they need to put some dollar figures on the table, and we can go back to the manager and say, give us 3 options, or this is a program cut area, et cetera, and provide them guidance that way. But it can't happen in a vacuum. So, it's perhaps early for me to put the spread or what my spread is, but we got to start having that discussion. And again, I don't feel bound by that range, but I wanted to put out my thinking. So, that's how I would suggest that we approach it moving forward. And if others have other thoughts, but I think what I'm articulating is consistent with the council guidance to the city manager, certainly as far as the budget deliberations go.
Could you just repeat your range? I'm sorry, I'm not sure I got the number. 130?
It was 127, which is the current rate, to about 133.5 to 135 is a rough range.
You mean?
I'm sorry, 127 to 133.5 gets us, includes the cable and build in a little bit of wriggle room if we need to add on top of that for anything that we haven't yet discussed. That's why I added roughly 2 pennies, just given how early it is in the discussion.
And then the stormwater fee would be separate from that, 5.5 cents.
Exactly, and that's the reason why I'm not trying to move anything, is because I want to make sure that we haven't voted on that. So the issue is, I'm headed in that direction, but again, we need to have that public discussion, and my views on that may change based on the feedback we get in. That's why I'm not, that's why I'm not saying, let's have it rated $1.25.
Understand, okay.
Or I'm sorry, $1.35.
Right, but the 133.5, even if we did stormwater the other way, would still come in at 139-ish. Is that fair to say? I mean, would you less than 141?
Well, again,
I'm not saying we're going to, I'm just trying to understand your numbers, okay. So is there another motion?
no, not right now. I haven't heard another motion being made. So those 3 motions are on the table. So, I suggest we have the roll call vote.
Mr. City Attorney, you have a correction.
Yeah, I wanted to bring to the council's attention my recommendation that the motion that was made on TO 13-07 regarding the budget be amended. It appears there's a phrase that's been dropped off. I think the appropriate motion to amend would be motion to amend and add the phrase and schedule second reading and final adoption on April 22nd.
Or I would say schedule second reading and public hearings on April.
Okay, but the public hearings part's already in there.
Right, but after schedule, add second reading.
I'm sorry.
Schedule public hearings on April 8th, and
I'm sorry, who made that motion? Was it Ms. Berry? If you want to clarify your motion.
with pleasure, if I could figure it out. Yeah. All right, So, Mr. Mayor, on advice of the city attorney, I'd like to revise the motion to read, I move to adopt TO 13-07 on first reading, schedule public hearings on April 8th and April 22nd, and for final adoption?
And schedule second reading and final adoption on.
And schedule second reading and final adoption on April 22nd.
Gets us there. All right.
Man, this is getting close.
All right. So now I think we've got a proper motion. Is that, who seconded that motion? Was it Mr. Galen? Is that?
Yeah, you did that.
That was
Calendar.
Mr. Duncan on, Mr. Duncan seconded.
Mr. Duncan, I take it that that revised,
Well, nicely done, Mr. Duncan.
No, this is the budget.
Oh,
It's the
okay.
budget
that's-
one.
This is TO 13-07, the FY14 budget.
Is that acceptable, Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. If we can now have the roll call vote.
Thank you, council. I'll call the roll on each of the three items regarding the budget. TO 13-07 on the FY14 budget, that was just
Miss-
amended motion.
I believe that Mr. Snyder had something.
Oh, you
Make
good?
a
No.
I move to amend TO 13-06 to substitute 139 for 149 wherever it appears.
Is there a second on that?
I'll second.
Okay. Discussion on that? Mr. Galen?
I'd just like to repeat that these last-minute changes with an arithmetic that I have no idea exactly what they mean and how they were calculated are contrary to good governance, so I can't go along with that. But we'll get to that specific.
Any other comments on it? Ms. Berry?
Has the tax rate been advertised?
Yes.
Yes.
So you'd be, how do you
We can go
amend
below.
it?
We can go below.
This is notching it and ratcheting it down. You can't go up, but you go down.
You can go down, not up. It's a one-way ratchet. And the numbers can also move on both the CIP and on the budget itself.
Would you like me to?
So this is on the amended motion. I don't need to open this up again, do I, Mr. Foster? So this is on the amended motion as presented by Council Member or Vice Mayor Snyder. If I can have the roll call on that.
This is Mr. Snyder, seconded by Mr. Tarter, to amend TO 13-06 to make 141, 139 every word exists in the document. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's what we're voting on right now.
That is what we're voting on right now.
To amend it, then we have to vote on the
This,
main part of the motion.
this is to amend the tax rate. TO 13-06. Are we ready, council?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Berry?
No.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Kalen?
No.
Mr. Pepe?
No.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Tarter?
Yes.
Mayor Baruch?
No.
Thank you, council. The item fails 4-3.
Okay, we're back to the main motion.
Back to the other main motion.
The other main motion.
TO 13-07.
Okay.
Okay, where are we?
13-07.
We're back to $1.41.
Back to
Amendment that we
FY14 budget.
Yes.
Are we all done with our motions now to?
Yes.
To go ahead and take votes on these
Yes.
items? Okay, on TO 13-07, the FY14 budget, Ms. Berry.
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Kalen?
Yes.
Mr. Pepe?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah.
Mr. Tarter?
Yes.
Mayor Baruch?
Yes.
Thank you, council. On the CIP, TO 13-08, Ms. Berry?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Kalen?
Yes.
Mr. Pepe?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Tarter?
Yes.
Mayor Baruch?
Yes.
Thank you, council. It passes unanimously, both items. On the 2013 tax rate, which is now advertised at 141, Ms. Berry?
What?
This is we're back to the tax rate. Tax rate that's
This
advertised
is your motion, Ms. Berry.
at 141.
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Kalen?
Yes.
Mr. Pepe?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Tarter?
Yes.
Mayor Baruch?
Yes.
Thank you, council.
There's still hope for us.
No
Yeah,
Donnybrook yet.
actually, yes. Compared to our other colleagues just a few miles away.
Okay. The last item under here is TR 13-11, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, declaring its intention to reimburse itself from the proceeds of one or more financings for certain capital project costs. And this gets one reading.
Happy Wednesday, Council. What you have before you is a resolution to declare our intention to reimburse ourselves for proceeds of one or more financings for certain capital projects. As you are aware, we have capital projects in fiscal year 2013 that are underway, but we have not formally done the bonding yet. So we would like to be in a position to reimburse ourselves for cost incurred from now until the time that we go to bond market. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on this? All right, if I can get a motion, please.
This one I'm going to get right.
Just read the proposed motion.
Are you prepared? Okay. Okay. Here we go. Move to adopt TR 13-11.
If I can get a second, please.
Second.
Thank you. That's Ms. Berry on the second. I'd like to open this item up for public comment. Are there any members of the public that wish to address this item? Shah, did we receive any public written comments on this? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this for public comment. Council, any comments before we take a vote? Okay, let's have the roll call vote, please.
Oh, okay.
On TR 13-11, Ms. Berry. Yes. Mr. Duncan. Yes. Mr. Kalin. Yes. Mr. Pepe. Yes. Mr. Snyder.
Yes.
Mr. Tarter. Yes. Mayor Brook.
Yes.
Thank you, council. We're on to consent, Mr. City Attorney, Mr. City Manager.
One item on consent, this motion to authorize the city manager to amend a contract with Reliable Engineering Services Incorporated to expend up to $300,000 for HVAC repairs, maintenance, and monitoring, subject to annual appropriation of funds by the city council budget. This is for HVAC maintenance and repairs at the 19 facilities that the city has, that the city operates.
Was there demonstrative
Notably,
tonight?
for significant HVAC repairs at the community center and the library would be included in this contract amount.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. And Ms. Berry?
And
anything
I was just wondering if
The-
the heat in City Hall was demonstrative of, and that was engineered so as to get this vote moving forward.
Correct.
Yes, okay.
Ms. Berry, anything on the appointments committee?
Yes. We don't have an emotion yet to move the consent items, do we?
Oh, I'm sorry. If I can have a motion on the consent items?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt the consent items.
Thank you.
Second, please.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Kalin. Okay, Ms. Berry.
Okay, I just wanted, once again, on behalf of the Appointments Committee.
Wait, we need a vote.
Oh, sorry, I thought we were going to talk about
We
the
did
appointments.
just wanna give-
We got to the motion. So
Okay,
We
motions,
also-
go.
we need a vote on consent.
We also
we
have,
ready?
wait, we also have the appointments on consent, don't we?
Oh, that's correct, I apologize.
So I want to give Ms. Berry a chance.
I got too excited.
What do you know? I actually got something right.
Thank you.
Compared to the clerk this evening.
Skated through.
Ms. Berry, anything that you'd like to report?
Simply to say that on behalf of the Appointments Committee, we are pleased to bring these candidates forward to the council, and again, thank these and other citizens for their generous commitment of time and expertise.
Thanks, Ms. Berry. And I believe that we had a first and a second, so if we can have the vote, please.
We can, thank you. On consent for Reliable Engineering and for appointments and reappointments, Ms. Berry.
Yes.
Mr. Duncan.
Yes.
Mr. Kalin.
Yes.
Mr. Pepe.
Yes.
Mr. Snyder.
Yes.
Mr. Tarter.
Yes.
Mayor Brook.
Yes.
Thank you, council. Now we are on 2 minutes.
Okay, council member comments? Mr. Kalin?
One comment, going back to the previous item, the Rushmark Teeters. May 13th is the date we're supposed to decide on this, correct?
I don't recall offhand, Mr. Shields.
I think it is. May 13th, right? That's when the decision will be made?
The decision for the Harris Teeter project? Yes, that's when.
Okay, the only thing I want to say is, up or down, let's have it on the 13th. No more discussion, one way or the other. Let's make, I just want to suggest that we make a vote and decide, no further discussion, extension of deadline.
To that point, if I could follow up, they need to get whatever revisions they've got in pretty soon, because if they're gonna have those analyzed and reviewed and the like, you know, if they're gonna add turn lanes and all that sort of thing, I would encourage them to get it in as soon as possible, so these boards and commissions have time to review and comment on, you know, what could be fairly significant changes.
I'm with Mr. Tartar on this. If they end up in a situation where they're dragging their heels and they present something last minute that nobody has an opportunity to look at, neither staff nor the boards and commission, that doesn't do us any favors. So I don't want to get into that situation, but I do want to take Mr. Kalen's point. But if they drag their heels and they drop something a day or two before our final, you know, what's supposed to be our final, and nobody's had a chance to look at it, that doesn't bode well for anybody.
I'm not sure I understand. I mean, what is it that they have to turn in? I mean, was that your summary? I mean, who decides when the questions have stopped and we?
Well, it's working its way through the boards and commissions process.
Okay, so that's where
it is right now.
Okay,
So they are gonna, at some point, possibly make a revised submission, or they may choose not to. My point is, if they choose to make a revised submission, there has to be enough time for staff to look at it.
One thing we've got to work with them on is, you know, the boards and commissions, the AAB, just as one important one, the planning commission, there will be comments and changes that come after meeting with those boards. So I think we should let them go through that process and then make changes accordingly, and then we'll review them. With boards and commissions, it's not typically iterative, where you go through all the boards and commissions, because we have a lot of them, and then you make changes and you run through a second time. That's usually not the way it goes. We have staff that go to all these meetings. We listen very carefully. We work with the developer. There's changes as it goes through, but then there's a resubmittal after they've gone through the boards and commissions to try to incorporate what we've all heard. That's what we're planning to do. Now, that because we have, you know, we've tried to make the process efficient, we'll get those changes, we'll get them in late April, and we'll have a work session to discuss them with council. I think we should do that together with the planning commission so we can look at them all together.
My only point, if I could, is just that the sooner they get in changes, particularly ones that may be significant, quote unquote, particularly things like traffic and the like getting in there, to me, that's fairly important. And I'd like to see this approved on the 13th as well, but it makes it more difficult if you get a stack of plans a couple days before the 13th that are, you know, need significant comment or review of. So I would just encourage the applicant to get in their changes, or at least present them to you in some fashion that you can start analysis of them, so it's not delayed at the last minute. That's my only point.
I'd share those points with Mr. Tartar. I think we all want to get this moving, and we've done everything we can to expedite it, but they have some responsibilities to get their comments incorporated and get them to staff and to the council timely.
Mr. Mayor, could you give me a fill on the Lincoln timetable? Is it coming up about that same time?
It's coming before, I think.
Yeah, so they are on the same timeline now.
Okay.
And Lincoln is going for the planning commission very shortly, I think this week. So they are making revisions right now. One just note, in terms of the effort, I mean, the boards and commissions, they inform staff as well as the developer, and then staff works with the developer to sort of sort through them all and say, these are the ones you really got to address. Here's some ones that are maybe more discretionary. You can't address all of them. In concert during time. Those staff work with the developer. So I don't think, I guess my point being, I don't think staff is going to be surprised by a resubmittal. There's going to be things that have been hashed out, like sketched out on draft paper, but then we'll get a formal resubmission.
Mr. Kelly?
Just make sure that you know, in your context with with Rushmark, that they understand that we would like to wrap this up on the 13th, and it's in their interest to move as quickly as possible. Obviously, if there are major changes, that, you know, that has to be considered, but that there is a will to move this forward by 13th. Therefore, it would be in their interest to deal with staff as quickly as possible and make sure everything is ironed out as rapidly as we can. Thank you.
Other council members, Mr. Tarr?
Just one last comment. I guess, to me, this sort of bodes at somewhat later point to discuss process, because it seems like we're really getting jammed up at the last minute with a lot of input from a lot of folks who spend a lot of time volunteering or giving it so late in the process that I don't think it really has adequate time to be fully addressed. And there's so many things that have already come before it that you get to the end of the line and everybody's just, we've got to move this thing to the finish line. I think at some later point we ought to discuss maybe a better process for the developers and for the community for the project.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I had actually suggested that the EDA, or I'm sorry, the EDC discuss about ways of improving the process, possibly looking at the Arlington model, where things are front-loaded with the various boards and commissions before it comes to council to begin with. And I think we've tried to do a hybrid, but I think it still could use improvement. So, but I think it's something that may be beneficial from the EDC taking on. And then we'll have to have public engagement, because it will be a very different process than what we've done on the SEs in the past. So, anything else, council members, comment-wise? Ms. Berry?
Just very, very quickly. I represent council on a number of COG environmental committees, and in the first part of this year, I've attended the Chesapeake Bay and Climate and Energy Policy, and the Air Quality Committee. I am now serving as council liaison, and I was particularly impressed by something, Mr. Pepe, I think you would be equally impressed. The entire committee documentation, this is their founding documents, this is their agendas, this is everything that you need to know, is on this totally cool thumb drive. And I just thought that, boy, this is the way to go, because there's a massive amount of information on this thing. And they have decided they're going to go paperless, and they're not going to provide any materials, just this. So I thought that was just an interesting piece. And the only other thing I wanted to say is I wanted to echo Mr. Duncan's congratulations to staff, to Deborah and to Jim Snyder, on what I don't think you meant to ask them to give you the entire history of grocery stores in the city of Falls Church. I think you asked the question, give me some perspective, but this is everything you will ever want to know about grocery stores from the 1800s in Falls Church proper. Fabulous.
Yep. Other council members?
The awesome power of being on the Falls Church City Council.
I tell you, it's amazing.
All right, other council members? Vice Mayor Snyder?
Hi, just very quickly, I followed up after the council's discussion on the COG board issue regarding their action to reduce gun violence. I did send a note to the other COG colleagues. If anyone wants to see that, feel free. I'll provide it to them.
Has there been any responses back, Dave?
Yeah, the city of Gaithersburg liked what we said.
Oh, can you send those to Kathy to distribute to council?
I can give it to you right. Okay.
I mean, just the responses. I think it would be good for us to know what's happening, since this is, again, we're likely to all get calls about this. All right, other council members?
Nope.
Okay. All right. We've got two sets of minutes. So on the minutes on February 11th, 2013, I had some edits on page 21. I had provided disclosure in writing, so I've just asked the city clerk to insert that, and I sent those to Ms. Bouchal this evening.
I'm sorry, on February 11th?
Yeah. This is
I'm sorry, and where was this?
approximately line 7, or I'm sorry, 879. The disclosure that I provided, I had given you a template. So if you can just insert the template that I had sent to you that evening.
Okay.
Other council members? Ms. Berry?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, on line 391, it's Ms. Garner, not Mr.
Okay, I'm sorry, what line was that?
391.
Thank you.
Other council members?
Nope, that wasn't on that.
Okay. So if I can get a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the minutes, the council minutes of February 11, 2013 as amended.
Thank you. If I can get a second. I need a second. Sorry, that was Mr. Carter on the second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. The minutes as amended are adopted. And then we had a set from February 25th, 2013. Any edits on this?
Yeah, I actually did.
Ms. Berry?
Mr. Mayor, on line 105, did we mean March 27th or February 27th? The meeting at American Legion? Because we were all there. I think it was February.
Yeah, February.
And then I had a question on line 244. I was confused why we had 10 attachments, all of the same attachment.
I think they're different.
But they all have the same, oh, I'm sorry, oh, you're right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sorry, it was TR 13-06, 7 different things. I'm sorry, yes, you're absolutely right.
Was that the?
That was it.
Okay, anything else on that set of minutes? That's the February 25th. If I can get a motion to adopt the February 25th minutes as amended. Can I have a motion, please?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt the minutes of the council meeting of February 25th, 2013 as amended.
Thank you. If I can get a second? That's Mr. Kalin on the second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. Those minutes are adopted. If I can get a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adjourn.
A second, please.
Second.
That's Mr. Snyder on the second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. We're adjourned. Thank you.